Yoruchi treaded her way towards the entrance of the cave vigilantly. Suddenly, a silhouette emerged from the entrance, and Yoruchi immediately rushed toward that figure in the dark cave with clenched fists. She couldn't afford to let anyone know that Muyang and the rest were here. The moment Kusu entered the cave, she was overjoyed as she felt Muyang's Ryatsu. However, she didn't have the time to observe her surrounding, and that was the time she heard a loud sound in her ear. Kusu shivered and immediately raised her Zanpakuto to block the enemy's ambush. Bang! Although Kusu did block Yoruichi's punch, she was pushed back quite far nonetheless. Kusu took a few steps back before going completely stiff as she was quite surprised. She was using Bankai now, and even though she was nowhere near the level of a captain, she wasn't to be taken lightly either, yet she was pushed back quite far. However, Yoruchi was even more surprised as she didn't hold back at all just now, yet Kusu was only pushed back, which shouldn't be possible for those below a captain's level. Captain Yoruchi. Kusu completely froze when she saw the face of the person that just punched her. Despite that, she didn't put her Zanpakuto away, nor did she let her guard down. Kusu. How did you find this place? Yoruchi stopped attacking as soon as she heard Kusu's voice, but she was just as vigilant as Kusu was. However, when she saw the Zanpakuto in Kusu's hand, Yoruichi's eyes widened. That shape. The crystal clear and near-transparent blade like white jade and the pure white silk thread hanging on the hilt made it completely different from Kusu's Zanpakuto in Shirkai and unreleased state. Is this Bankai? Did she learn Bankai already? Yoruchi looked at the person in front of her with excitement. She knew that it'd be hard for Kusu to learn Bankai since her Ryatsu was quite low when she was born. Now, she was in dilemma whether she should thank God for rewarding Kusu's hard work, or should she praise Muyang for raising and guiding her this far since she was considered talentless. Captain Yoruchi, what about Captain? Kusu asked anxiously as she looked at Yoruchi in the eye. Is she here to find Kimura? Yoruchi still wondered even though she already knew that must be the case. Kusu. Why are you here? Muyang beat Yoruchi to it. His whole body was still aching due to skeleton restructure. After listening to Kaze no Sora's words and actually going through with the racial reconstruction himself, Muyang seemed to grasp what was happening to his body. This process would make his bones several times stronger, but he immediately woke up when he sensed Kusu's Ryatsu, albeit it was a little bit different from her usual Ryatsu. As Muyang approached Kusu, the Zanpakuto in Kusu's hands eventually entered his field of vision, and he couldn't contain the joy in his heart. He had never seen Kusu's Zanpakuto in that form before, so he immediately asked, "Is that your Bankai, Kusu?" Captain. Seeing Muyang, Kusu was on the verge of tears. She was relieved that Muyang was safe and sound. In response to Muyang's question, Kusu nodded, "This is my Bankai Kamazen no Kyumo." Well done. Hearing Kusu's affirmation, Muyang nodded as she was proud of her before turning towards Yoruchi. Okay, there's no need to be so tense, Yoruchi. After what Muyang said, Yoruchi breathed a sigh of relief. It seemed that Kusu didn't mean them any harm. Okay, Kusu, can you tell us what is happening outside now? Muyang took Kusu inside and asked her to sit beside Tsukabashi Tessai, and the three were completely fixated on Kusu, waiting for her answer. They didn't know the current situation out there since they've been hiding there for a while. Kusu then explained about the current situation now, but she didn't know that much either. Although there was no report whatsoever from those in charge of the soul disappearance case, and Godiai 13 couldn't find any information related to them even after launching a thorough investigation. So, to avoid panic, only a select few knew about the news, and Kusu was basically clueless about what happened until she received the news from Hell Butterfly, so she only told them everything she heard from the Hell Butterfly. Captain, what the hell is going on? Why did Central 46 announce that kind of news? So, the Central 46 themselves ordered this. I'm sure this is part of Aizen's plan. Muyang nodded, looking thoughtful, after hearing some comments from Kusu. Central 46's order. How did those old fogies end up taking Aizen's? I mean, I know they're very stubborn and old-fashioned, but at least their behavior is always in line with a moral compass, yet why did they take Aizen's? Yoruichi said with a curious look. It's Kaika Suigetsu. I think those old fogies believed what they were doing was in line with Soul Society's moral compass because of Aizen's Kaika Suigetsu. Captain. Muyang turned toward Kusu and said, I don't know since when you learned Bankai, but well save that for later. With this, I can rest easy and leave the 10th division in your hands. What? The look on Kusu's face instantly changed. Where are you going, Captain? Where? Of course, he'll be accompanying them and leave Soul Society. Shinji and the rest had no choice but to leave Soul Society, and Kisuke's help is indispensable if we want to cure them. Captain, I will go with you. Kusu said without hesitation with determined eyes. You? Muyang laughed. I'm afraid that wouldn't work. If you are gone, what will happen to the 10th division? I don't care about that. I just want to go wherever Captain goes. Seeing the determined expression on Kusu's face, Muyang was at a loss, but what should he do? Although Kusu was usually quite docile, this time she seemed like a whole different person, but since this was her own decision, there was no room for negotiation. Not good. Tsukabashi Tesei's complexion suddenly changed, and his eyes widened as he looked at Muyang and Yoruichi. Someone is here. Is it just a coincidence? Yoruichi's complexion changed and asked. I don't know what this person is here for. Tsukabashi Tesei's tone was heavy. Can you tell whose Ryatsu is it? Muyang asked. If it were Captain Commander, it would be bad. Tsukabashi Tesei closed his eyes and sharpened his senses to perceive whose Ryatsu it was before opening his eyes and shook his head. I can't tell. Let me try. Kusu suddenly waved the Zanpakuto in her hand. The silk thread hanging at the Zanpakuto's hilt then extended all the way out, slowly fading as it crossed Tsukabashi Tesei's barrier. The scenery outside suddenly entered Kusu's head. A moment later, Kusu opened her eyes and immediately looked at Muyang. It's Captain Karaku. Your Zanpakuto can even do that? Muyang didn't expect that Kusu was even capable of that after learning Bankai. He's all by himself. Yes. Muyang and Yoruichi glanced at each other, and both of them clearly had their doubts about this. Why did Karaku Shunsui come here alone? But this was not the time to think about this problem. Kisuke, how many jigai you've completed? Muyang turned his head and asked Urahara Kisuke. 9 so far, and your jigai is already done. I don't think we can make it. Take care of Shinji and the rest. Go ahead without me. What? Urahara Kisuke stopped his hands and looked at Muyang. We may have been found out. Go on ahead and take them to human world. I will buy as much time for you as I can. See you there. You. Relax, I have a plan. As Urahara saw the look in Muyang's eyes, he nodded. It seemed like there was no other way. Now that he realized the time was running out, Urahara picked up the pace and continued making jigai as fast as he could. Muyang then stood up and immediately walked outside. Captain. Seeing Muyang stand up, Kusu also stood up and looked at Muyang nervously. Don't worry, you can tag along if you want. It shouldn't be a problem if it's just Karaku. I leave the 10th division in your hands once I leave. Muyang immediately used Shuanpa and arrived at Skyaku Hill before Kusu could answer him. Kusu followed Muyang shortly after. I wonder what's going to happen, Muyang murmured on top of Skyaku Hill. The process of his skeleton reconstruction hasn't finished. Not only was he in constant pain, he also couldn't move a few parts of his body, meaning he couldn't fight at his best. You really are here? Karaku said as he tilted down his straw hat with a knowing look on his eyes. Yes. Muyang nodded, but that aside, how did you know I am here? Although I look so lazy and unmotivated most of the time, the 8th Division is an intelligence team, remember? Karaku said with a smug. So that's how it is. Muyang nodded, then looked towards Karaku. So, what are you planning to do? Wait, don't be hasty. You know me, don't you? Realizing Muyang seemed somewhat on guard around him, Karaku tried to calm Muyang down. Only after Muyang seemed less on guard did Karaku smile before getting serious again. So, can you tell me your part of the story? Although Muyang did calm down a little, he remained vigilant. Although Karaku always seemed laid back and flamboyant, he wouldn't hesitate to resort to cheap tricks once things got serious. Although he couldn't completely trust him, Karaku was a keen person that could distinguish the truth. There was no guarantee that Karaku would believe him even if he told him what he knew, but he should be able to think on his own, and it might have a certain impact on Aizen's future actions. With that in mind, Muyang decided to tell him what he knew, including Aizen's scheme and goals. As for Aizen's Kaika Suigetsu's true ability, Muyang was still wondering whether he should tell Karaku about it. Aizen has planned everything thoroughly, and before going up against him again, Muyang didn't want to change the plot too much. He didn't know how much change had caused to the original plot if he exposed Aizen's Kaika Suigetsu ability. Besides, if the plot were mostly unchanged, then he'd hold the key for the battle 100 years later because he had the vital information. After listening to Muyang's explanation, Karaku was silent. He believed most of what Muyang said. After all, he and Muyang have been friends for more than 100 years, so he knew that Muyang was not the kind of person who would do that kind of thing. Moreover, he, Hirako Shinji, and the rest have been friends for more than 100 years, and Shinji used to be Muyang's lieutenant too. However, Aizen being the mastermind was a whole different story. Although he knew that there was no need for Muyang to frame a lieutenant, he did see Aizen in Suriidii last night at the 5th Division with 2 other 5th Division members at the almost exact same time as Muyang encountered Aizen, according to his story. Karaku realized there must be something Muyang was hiding from him. Although he didn't know what it was, Karaku had a feeling that it might be the key to this matter, but since Muyang didn't say it, he figured out that Muyang must have his reasons. Karaku looked slightly relaxed as he cast the doubt away from his heart and then asked, "How is Lisa-chan?" It's still hard to say at this point. Can she be cured? Of course. Seeing that Karaku seemed so concerned, Muyang replied vehemently and then added, "With Kisuke's ability, they will be fine for sure." Hearing Muyang's determined answer, Karaku was relieved. He was sincerely worried about Lisa, but since Muyang answered so vehemently, he just had to believe in him. Karaku was about to say something, but his expression suddenly changed and then looked towards Muyang with a wry smile. "This is bad, old man Yama is here." Just as like Karaku, Muyang also showed an apparent change in his face. Now that Karaku said it, he also sensed Yamamoto's Ryatsu was approaching. However, in his current state, he couldn't even hold his Zanpakuto, and even if he could, there was no chance he could win against Yamamoto. While Muyang was still busy thinking of a way out, Yamamoto has already appeared in front of Karaku with his Captain Haori fluttering in the wind. The look of anger couldn't be concealed from his face as he looked at Muyang. Seeing the look Yamamoto's face made Muyang shiver. This was the first time Muyang saw Yamamoto this angry. At worst, he just scared everyone with a glare. "Do you have anything else you want to tell me?" Yamamoto said with an imposing tone. "Old Yamamoto, there's something fishy about this whole case. Can you please hear Kimura out first?" Even Karaku was also startled. How long has it been since he saw old Yamamoto this angry? Was it because he had high hopes for Kimura? Karaku did not know for sure, but he immediately stepped up, hoping that he could appease Yamamoto. Otherwise, only God knew what would happen. Hearing Karaku's words, Yamamoto restrained himself for a bit. "Is it as Karaku said? Did you really know something I don't?" Muyang was touched when he heard Yamamoto's question. Normally, Yamamoto wouldn't ask that kind of question once he deemed someone was at fault. Just like his Zanpakuto, Yamamoto's temper was like a blazing fire. In short, he went as far as asking Muyang this question because of his affection for him. But despite knowing Yamamoto's intention, Muyang decided not to say anything. Even if he spilled out everything about Aizen and took him down, Shinji and the others would not escape the fate of being executed. There was no way Central 46 would let Shinji and the rest, who tainted Shinigami's reputation by taking in Hollow's power, walk away. Even Yamamoto, the captain commander of Gotei 13, can't refute Central 46's commands. Seeing Muyang bowed in silence, Yamamoto burst into a rage once again. Kiraku inwardly sighed because he didn't expect things would turn this bad. Since you have nothing to say, just stay down and let me finish you off myself. Yamamoto held his staff up, and a terrifying Ryatsu slowly arose within his body, like a sleeping beast gradually waking up. The wooden staff was peeled off, revealing a Zanpakuto hidden in the staff, the oldest and most powerful fire-type Zanpakuto in Soul Society. Reduce all creation to ash, Raijin Jaka. Like a volcanic eruption, a terrifying Ryatsu surged from Yamamoto. It was the most powerful Ryatsu that Muyang had ever felt so far. It was nothing like how he fought Yamamoto last time. At the same time, as Yamamoto surged wildly, a blazing flame followed as if to scorch the air itself. Muyang felt like his skin was scorched even though there was quite a distance between him and Yamamoto. It wasn't until this moment that Muyang realized that Yamamoto didn't go all out during their bout last time. If Yamamoto was really at full strength right now, then Muyang suspected that he only used half of its strength last time. Get away. Realizing how intimidating Yamamoto's Ryatsu was, Muyang immediately told Kusu to back off as she might die from the impact alone even though she has learned Bankai. Suzuki Kusu nodded and immediately retreated. She also realized that there was nothing she could do this time, so instead of staying there and drag Muyang down, she might as well retreat so that Muyang could focus. Come, young gun, Yamamoto said with glaring eyes as the flame around him burned even hotter. Even after Yamamoto laid bare his killing intent, Muyang just stood still without the slightest hint of doing anything. How naive. Yamamoto said when he saw Muyang didn't even take a stance even though he was ready to take him down at any moment. With a swing of Yamamoto's Zanpakuto, a flame rushed towards Muyang like a dragon. He could feel its heat even before it touched his skin, as expected of the strongest Shinigami in Soul Society for thousands of years. Muyang neither drew his Zanpakuto, nor did he use Shuunpa to dodge it. Instead, he decided to block Yamamoto's attack bare-handed. He took a stance and punched the flame with his left fist. Bang! Even though Muyang was shocked by the force generated from the impact, he managed to repel Yamamoto's flame. Oh, are you planning to fight me without even drawing your Zanpakuto? Yamamoto wasn't really surprised when he saw his flame was repelled so easily by Muyang as he roughly knew what Muyang was capable of. I did it out of respect for you, Captain Commander. Muyang said to Yamamoto, standing tall before him. Preposterous. Do you think I will lend an ear to your reasoning at this point? Yamamoto glared, followed by the flame from his Zanpakuto surging through the sky as if trying to dye the sky red. Shwa. Muyang only saw a silhouette flashing in front of him and felt a scorching heat from his side before a sword almost grazed his face. It was so close that he could feel the wind from the swinging impact. He reflectively bent his back to dodge the attack, then planted his left foot on the ground as a pivot and drove his right foot at Yamamoto as fast as he could. However, Muyang's kick didn't land as Yamamoto immediately used Shuunpa and appeared behind Muyang the moment his attack missed. Feeling an ominous wind behind him, Muyang shuddered. As expected of the Captain Commander, his Shuunpa was so fast. Then again, even though Muyang was amazed by Yamamoto's Shuunpa, he didn't plan on losing either. He immediately used Shuunpa as well and disappeared before Yamamoto's eyes. Even though Muyang managed to avoid Yamamoto's attack once again, Yamamoto was already beside him, swinging his Zanpakuto at Muyang's waist. Nothing less than someone a Shunpa expert who had honed his Shunpa for thousands of years. An average person couldn't even hope to achieve the same level as him. That was Muyang's thought when Yamamoto's Zanpakuto slashed him. SSSKKK. Muyang seemed dazed as he couldn't believe that he'd be taken down so easily as the flame of Yamamoto's Zanpakuto burned him to cinders. What? Seeing Muyang was engulfed in Ryujin Jaka's flame, Kusu couldn't help but cry out in surprise, but she immediately calmed down as if sensing something. Way of Onmitsu, third of the Shi, Utsasimi. Muyang suddenly appeared behind Yamamoto, looking at Yamamoto in an imposing manner without a single scratch on his body. Interesting. Yamamoto turned around and glanced at Muyang. However, it's nothing but a little trick. Are you not going to draw your Zanpakuto at all? I already gave you a chance to do so, so don't blame me if you die before even drawing your Zanpakuto. Seeing Yamamoto's calm eyes, Muyang found himself terrified. Yamamoto was frightening enough when he was angry, but Muyang knew deep down that he was even scarier when he was calm and collected. Knowing he was in danger, Muyang immediately drew his Zanpakuto and held it in his left hand. Usually Muyang would use both hands to hold his Zanpakuto, but since his right hand couldn't move properly yet, he had no choice but to use his left hand. Indeed, it was better than fighting bare-handed, but Yamamoto noticed something odd about the way Muyang drew and held his Zanpakuto. Even Kairaku and Kusu frowned when he saw it. So that's how it is. You can't hold your Zanpakuto with your right hand, that explains why you're insisting on fighting me bare-handed. Yamamoto squinted for a few seconds before his eyes widened all of a sudden again, but no matter what kind of circumstances you're in, I'll still beat the answer out of you. Play your melody, Kaze no Sora. Intense lightning crept up from Muyang's Zanpakuto into his body, shrouding him like a lightning armor that gave off a crackling sound. Kaze no Sora, the strongest wind-type Zanpakuto in Soul Society. Its wind element is so strong that it came with additional lightning attribute power, and even that secondary power is stronger than most lightning-type Zanpakuto. Yamamoto sounded a little regretful as he glanced at Muyang. I thought you would be one of my loyal men who will enforce Soul Society's justice, but you turn out to be. Forget it. There's no point in exchanging words any further. Since you have used Shirkai, I will no longer hold back. Yamamoto said solemnly. Hearing Yamamoto's words, Muyang gasped. He couldn't help but wonder just how strong Yamamoto truly was if he still held back just now. Raijin Jaka, Hidetsum, Nadajairi. Sensing the formidable power from Yamamoto's Zanpakuto, Muyang couldn't help but palpitate. However, he made sure to grasp the situation. Immediately after, Muyang counterattacked with 3 consecutive slashes, and each of them formed a compressed air blade. The 3 compressed air blades combined into one, enhancing its power before coming into contact with Yamamoto's attack. Bang! The collision of their attack caused a catastrophic aftereffect, followed by a rumbling sound. It was so intense that Karaku and Kusu were forced to retreat further. Before the aftermath of their attack subsided, both Yamamoto and Muyang already rushed forward. Yamamoto's Zanpakuto was covered by scorching hot flame, while Muyang's Zanpakuto was enveloped in azure light. However, that azure light was not to be underestimated as the Ryatsu it contained was clearly on a whole different level. Dang 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 dang. Muyang exchanged blows with Yamamoto so many times, and each of them would cause catastrophic aftermath, making it seem as if Skyaku Hill was just hit by a fallen meteor. I never expect Kimura is already at the point where he can stand his own against old man Yama. Karaku was in awe when he witnessed Muyang's power. There was a chance that Muyang might be even stronger than himself. The two kept fighting, and at some point, Muyang was forced on the defensive. He didn't seem to be in such a good state, with his clothes being kindled and burned as the battle went on. He had to endure the extreme heat before he could do anything, and that alone cut down his capability in battle quite considerably. However, if he didn't protect himself from the heat with his Ryatsu, he wouldn't be able to withstand the heat, so he was in a dilemma. Muyang readjusted his breathing. Although it was true that his clothes were constantly burned, he didn't sustain any major injury. Muyang didn't know what to say at this point. Although his right hand couldn't hold his Zanpakuto because of the skeletal reconstruction process, and he was forced to fend off Yamamoto's attack with only his left hand, he didn't feel like he was at a disadvantage at all as his speed and power have skyrocketed. His Ryatsu and reaction speed had risen as well. Hadn't he gained this advantage, he wouldn't be able to fend off Yamamoto's attack even if he could use his right hand. Urahara finally arrived when Muyang and Yamamoto were busy wreaking havoc on Skyaku Hill. "Kisuke, is everything ready?" Yoruchi immediately asked Urahara when she saw the last jigai was done. "Well, aside from Kimura's jigai, I've finished 10 jigai." Urahara sighed, looking completely exhausted. He has been at it for 20 straight hours, after all. "Let's hurry then," Yoruchi said almost immediately. Urahara nodded as he began putting Shinji's spirit body into the newly completed jigai. This Ryatsu concealing jigai that he just developed could completely block off the Ryatsu of anything inside it, even from the most sophisticated Ryatsu detector equipment, which Urahara has specially developed to hide in human world safely. Seeing Urahara was consistently loading Shinji and the rest into the gig ace, Yoruchi was a bit relieved. She believed that they would be cured with Kisuke's help. Then again, she could also feel the violent Ryatsu from Muyang and Yamamoto fighting on Skyaku Hill. Even if Muyang was quite strong, his opponent this time was the strongest Shinigami in 1,000 years of Godiai 13's history. Could he really make his escape with such a formidable opponent? Yoruchi-san. Yoruchi came back to her senses when she heard Urahara's voice. She couldn't even sense Urahara and Tessei's Ryatsu now, even though they were right in front of her because of the jigai. She couldn't help but be amazed at Urahara's skill. "We're ready to go. You guys go on ahead. I will contact you again." "Understood." Urahara nodded and then looked towards Yoruchi with a trace of concern in his eyes. "You'll be on your own, so be careful." "TSK. Who do you think you're talking to? You're the one who should be careful," Yoruchi said with a confident look in her eyes. "Got it." Urahara chuckled before taking Shinji and the rest together to Senkamen that Tessai had opened before. "Kisuke." Urahara stopped. "Take care." Urahara grinned before turning around and said, "I'm truly grateful we can experience moments like this with Yoruchi-san." On that note, Urahara returned to his poker face and stepped into the Senkamen. "Goodbye, Yoruchi-san." Yoruiki's emotion got the better of her as she watched Urahara and Tessai left through Senkamen, Yoruchi. She couldn't help but feel a little sad and lonely, but quickly suppressed the emotions in her heart. Since Kisuke had already left, she should go as well. Right above her, Kimura was facing Captain Commander by himself. In a blink of an eye, Yoruchi had already arrived at Skyaku Hill using Shunpa. As the Onmitsuki's commander-in-chief, she could easily conceal her whereabouts, even from the 3 powerful captains nearby. None of them realized that she was hiding somewhere nearby. Of course, that was partly because they were all so focused on the battle between Muyang and Yamamoto. Kusu, however, noticed Yoruchi right after she used Shunpa, but she made sure not to let it show on her face. She was a little relieved because Urahara should have left without a hitch now that Yoruchi was here, and the only task at hand was making their escape. Muyang wasn't aware that Yoruchi was already in the vicinity, but he did anticipate that Urahara should have been done with his preparation and headed to the world of the living as long as there was no unexpected situation, so he had to think about how to escape from Yamamoto, but of course that was no easy task. Muyang's right hand suddenly trembled. He could feel that the skeletal reconstruction on his right hand was almost over. He'd be able to go all out as long as he could buy a little more time. Once it was complete, escaping should be no problem even if he couldn't defeat Yamamoto. Shwa 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 shwa. While Muyang and Yamamoto were busy fighting, several silhouettes appeared on Skyaku Hill. "Kiraku, what in the world happened that Genrosai-sensei actually let out such a massive Ryatsu? Yukitake immediately asked Kuraku the moment he saw him. Kuchiki Jinrei and Unohana Retsu, who arrived at the same time as Yukitake, also looked towards Kuraku Shunsui with puzzled eyes, waiting for his answer. Kuraku then went ahead and told them the whole story, of course, without mentioning a thing about Aizen. After all, it was nothing but Muyang's opinion. There was no easy way to explain it without raising a question among them. Besides, even if Muyang were a captain, his words wouldn't always mean the truth, especially when it sounded like nothing but slandering a lieutenant. After listening to Kurika's story, everyone's eyes were focused on Muyang and Yamamoto. Even though they all knew that Muyang was a renowned prodigy, and he has constantly built his strength throughout the years, no one expected that he could stand his ground against Captain Commander. TSK Zaraki Kenpachi clicked his tongue after seeing who was fighting on Skyaku Hill. I immediately rushed here after sensing such a tremendous Ryatsu. So much for hoping it was a new guy that I can fight with. Although Zaraki Kenpachi was extremely belligerent, he was not tactless. No matter how he looked at it, there was no place for him to join the fight. Furthermore, no matter how reluctant he was to admit it, he knew that both Muyang and Yamamoto were beyond his league. Good grief, I didn't expect the brat from back then has become this powerful. Yamamoto couldn't contain his sentiment, be proud that you can push me this far. Yamamoto then raised his Zanpakuto high with his right hand, and his left hand also gripped the Zanpakuto's hilt. Once he held his Zanpakuto with both hands, the atmosphere around him changed. Seeing Yamamoto's move, all captains watching them were startled. That posture is kend. As Yamamoto's students, Kuraku and Yukitake were obviously familiar with Yamamoto's kend. Zaraki Kenpachi had also studied kend under Yamamoto for a few days, and needless to say that Unohana Retsu and Kuchiki Jinrei were aware of that too, and that was exactly why they were even more surprised. Muyang himself was surprised. He has learned Zanjutsu under Yamamoto's guidance for a while, and he had experienced firsthand how strong Yamamoto was when he used kend. He could already feel the pressure the moment Yamamoto took his stance, and he backpedaled before realizing it. Under the current circumstances, Muyang couldn't afford to worry about his right hand. All he knew was there was no way he could withstand Yamamoto's kend with only Shirkai. Muyang's Zanpakuto suddenly glowed and an astonishing amount of Ryatsu burst out of Muyang's body, followed by the lighting around it. His eyes were clear yet intimidating. Bankai, Hakaze no Kiru. Bankai, Hakaze no Kiru. An immense Ryatsu burst forth from Muyang, and the spectator's expression changed. It was an extremely powerful Ryatsu, even from a captain's perspective. Seeing Yamamoto was ready to strike him down with his flame-covered Zanpakuto, Muyang couldn't think of anything else other than using his Bankai. His Zanpakuto was instantly covered in purple light, which upon closer inspection, turned out to be minuscule lightning and the almost visible wind blending into one. As Muyang defended himself from Yamamoto's attack with his Zanpakuto, a loud sound instantly echoed throughout Skyaku Hill. Boom! As the Zanpakutos collided, the flame on Yamamoto's Zanpakuto burst forth, dyeing the sky red, and the wind from the impact forced everyone back. Despite being able to withstand Yamamoto's attack, Muyang backed off a few steps. Even though he was using Bankai now, he was slightly more at ease if he put some distance from Yamamoto. Yamamoto brandished his Zanpakuto before lowering it down, and the flame around him converged around him. He then stared intently at Muyang in the distance. Muyang also brandished his Zanpakuto, and his body was suddenly enveloped by the wind. The wind that was invisible and intangible suddenly solidified around Muyang to the point that it was visible to the naked eye. To be honest, I don't really want to fight you with old Yamamoto. Muyang sighed as he glanced at his Zanpakuto. Hadn't he used Bankai at the last minute, he wouldn't be able to stop Yamamoto's attack for sure. In fact, Yamamoto's flame became even fiercer because of his wind element Zanpakuto. You're still spouting such a thing after going this far? Just how naive can you be? Yamamoto scolded Muyang. He didn't expect that Muyang was still as soft as ever, even though he had gotten stronger. There shouldn't be any more hesitation now that they both have drawn their sword. The blade of those who hesitated shall never reach their enemy. Muyang was speechless when he heard Yamamoto was actually lecturing him at the time like this, thinking that he was hesitating. That's not it, old man Yama. Although he kind of made fun of Yamamoto deep down for getting the wrong way, Muyang sincerely respected him, whether it was for his strength or fighting spirit, but I didn't want to fight with you out of hesitation. It's because of the bad matchup between our Zanpakuto. Muyang swung his Zanpakuto, which sent forth a gust of wind to demonstrate his Zanpakuto's power. You should be aware that my Zanpakuto is a wind element, and your Zanpakuto is a fire element. Wind will only intensify fire, so a wind-type Zanpakuto like mine should be at a disadvantage against yours. I see. Yamamoto noticed that Muyang's clothes were burned down by the flame just now. Are you trying to say that you lose against me simply because your Zanpakuto has a bad affinity with mine? No, no, no. Muyang waved his hand. Zanpakuto is also one's strength. How can I resort to such a way of thinking? If I lose, I'm simply no match for you. Making such petty excuses is the trait of the weak. The strong will always find the way to win. Oh ho. Yamamoto squinted as he seemed to get the wrong idea about Muyang. Although wind indeed intensifies fire, once it reaches a certain level, it will be able to extinguish the flame. Muyang said confidently. Are you saying that your wind can extinguish my flame? Yamamoto's expression remained unchanged, but everyone could clearly feel that his Ryatsu was getting more and more intimidating. I'm not so sure earlier, but now Muyang moved around his right hand and felt power course throughout his whole body. At this moment, Muyang smiled as he knew that the skeletal reconstruction process was complete. Muyang then held his Zanpakuto with both hands, facing straight at Yamamoto. However, the aura around him was completely different from last time. Yamamoto obviously picked up on the sudden change within Muyang, but he didn't expect that Muyang's kend would be this terrifying. He only took his stance, yet Yamamoto could feel his skin was tingling. Old man Yama, here I come. Muyang instantly sprung out toward Yamamoto so fast as if he bent time and space. No one could see it clearly. The only thing they could say was it was simply fast. SSKKK. Blood spurted from Yamamoto's shoulder. Yamamoto had been injured from the attack just now. Muyang was still holding his Zanpakuto with both hands, and his expression remained unchanged even though he managed to injure the strongest Shinigami for 1,000 years. Kiraku and Yukate's expressions suddenly changed after noticing that Captain Commander Yamamoto was actually injured. This has not happened for nearly 1,000 years. Even Unohana Retsu was no exception, even though she seemed calm at all times. Even though everyone was surprised, Muyang didn't seem pleased at all. Even though he did manage to injure Yamamoto just now, that attack just now was basically the strongest attack he got at the moment, and it only caused a minor injury to Yamamoto. Yes, just a minor injury. Although Yamamoto indeed bled just now, Muyang realized that the cut was too shallow when he attacked Yamamoto earlier. Splendid. Yamamoto turned around and looked at Muyang with a hint of appreciation in his eyes. Although he was just injured by Muyang was wounded, Yamamoto's expression remained unchanged as if he wasn't injured to begin with. Muyang himself lowered his Zanpakuto down and looked at Yamamoto with admiration. The moment his attack almost landed, Yamamoto managed to move away slightly. Even though he didn't completely dodge the attack, it minimized the damage thanks to his strong physique and massive Ryatsu. Muyang had nothing but respect for Yamamoto. His skillful Zenjutsu, swift Shuinpa, and lifelong combat experience were worthy of the title the strongest Shinigami in 1,000 years. Although he hasn't seen Yamamoto's kid firsthand, but he did watch the episode where Yamamoto used Itokeso, and he could safely say that Yamamoto's Zenkinsoki was at the pinnacle of Shinigami's power. Although my body is covered with scars, no one can leave a wound on my body during the last 1,000 years aside from you," Yamamoto said solemnly. He was at a loss whether he should be happy that a youngster like Muyang could come this far or lament the fact that the youngster betrayed Soul Society. It was exactly because of his lifelong experience that Yamamoto was at a loss in this kind of situation. "Who's there?" While everyone's attention was focused on Muyang and Yamamoto, Kusu, who has been watching from the sidelines, suddenly shouted and thrust her Zanpakuto on the ground even though there was no one there. Everyone was obviously startled as Kusu suddenly yelled and swung her sword into thin air as if there was somebody there. Dang! However, at the next second, the sound of two swords colliding startled everyone. "Pardon me, I felt immense reiatsu here and rushed here right away out of worry for the captains. I was hiding because I was afraid of disturbing the captains." Complete to my surprise, Lieutenant Suzuki found out. "I'm really sorry." Aizen's figure suddenly appeared, blocking off Kusu's attack. He immediately apologized as soon as he made his appearance as if nothing happened, and the look on his face was absolutely convincing. "Pardon me, I felt immense reiatsu here and rushed here right away out of worry for my captain. I was hiding because I was afraid of disturbing the captains." Complete to my surprise, Lieutenant Suzuki found out. "I'm really sorry." In addition to the reputation he has built up until now, his expression was really convincing, as if he was seriously worried about his captain, so the captains in the vicinity didn't doubt him at all. "It's all right. Come here, Susukuen," Yukitake sure said with a faint smile. "Thank you very much, Captain Yukitake." Aizen bowed before walking towards Yukitake sure. Kiraku, however, eyed him warily. Some of the captains didn't even realize that Aizen was hiding nearby, and based on what Muyang said to him earlier, Aizen became even more suspicious in Kirika's eyes. Even if he didn't conceal his presence just now, Kiraku believed that he must have other secrets. Although Muyang was in the middle of a fight with Yamamoto, he made sure to keep track of Aizen. After all, no one knew what that guy was planning by coming here, and he was really worried. However, there was one more thing that concerned Muyang right now. Even though the captains in the vicinity didn't thoroughly scan the area, it was a fact that they couldn't detect Aizen was lurking around, so he believed that Aizen must be using Kaika Suigetsu to mess with the captain's senses. However, Kusu managed to find Aizen. Could Kusu's ability cancel out Aizen's Kaika Suigetsu? Muyang's heart beat faster when he thought of this probability. If he had someone who could cancel out Aizen's Kaika Suigetsu, then the battle with Aizen would be easier for sure. Even though Muyang let Aizen did Kaika Suigetsu's activation requirement in front of him on purpose and fought Aizen in order to find a hole in his Zanpakuto's ability, it sure gave him a run for his money. Suddenly, Muyang's complexion changed. If Kusu could really cancel out Aizen's Kaika Suigetsu, then Aizen would definitely get rid of her with any means necessary. And sure enough, as Muyang turned his head towards Aizen that was standing behind the captains, he saw Aizen was looking at Kusu with evil eyes. Shortly after, Aizen looked towards Muyang as if taunting him. Shit! Seeing the look in Aizen's eyes, it seemed that Aizen was also aware that Kusu could cancel out his Kaika Suigetsu. It seemed like Aizen would eliminate Kusu at all cost. Muyang at first planned to leave Kusu behind, but that didn't seem like such a good idea now. She would definitely die at Aizen's hands if he didn't take her along. Provided the current situation, Muyang knew he couldn't afford to keep his cards hidden. He wouldn't be able to escape if he didn't use his new power at this rate, even though he knew he hasn't completely mastered it. With that in mind, Muyang firmly held his Zanpakuto, and Muyang's body was covered by a small breeze. However, with each passing second, the wind circulated faster and faster, and it became bigger and bigger. In just a few seconds, a whirlwind was blown around Muyang, with him as the eye of the storm. Yamamoto stood squinting opposite Muyang, and the robe rustled because of the wind, but Yamamoto himself stood tall before the whirlwind without batting an eye. Amazing! So this is the famous strongest wind-type Zanpakuto's power. Even though Yamamoto was unfazed, the same couldn't be said to other captains. Kurosaki saw the raging whirlwind around Muyang and was speechless for a second. Muyang suddenly waved his hand, and the whirlwind around him suddenly dispersed. The dispersed whirlwind traversed through Skyaku Hill, covering every nook and cranny. Suddenly, Muyang fiddled around with his finger as if there was something in the air, and then a slight smile appeared on the corner of his mouth. Judging from the information he felt through the wind, Kisuke had already evacuated with Shinji and the rest. In addition, Yoruichi was hiding in the vicinity. With that information, Muyang was a little more relieved. With Yoruichi's help, he would have a higher chance of escaping. She was, after all, the best at Shuunpa in Seoul society. Now that Muyang found the light of hope, he raised his Zanpakuto, and massive Ryatsu was concentrated on his Zanpakuto to the point that it glowed in azure color. The whirlwind that originally enveloped Muyang was like being drawn to his Zanpakuto too. Bzztt bzztt. Now, all the wind around Muyang had converged on the blade, causing a buzzing sound. What an intense Ryatsu! Although the wind around Muyang's Zanpakuto was invisible to the naked eye, Yukitake could clearly feel the concentrated Ryatsu on Muyang's Zanpakuto. Even though he knew that Yamamoto wouldn't lose, he couldn't help but doubt his own judgment once he saw Muyang's Zanpakuto. Muyang looked towards Yamamoto that was just watching him without a care as Muyang prepared his big move. "Are you just gonna watch until I'm done preparing my big move, Captain Commander?" Muyang couldn't help but ask as he found it so strange that Yamamoto just let him get away with such an advantage. "I'm just curious to see what kind of attack you're going to show me after taking this long," Yamamoto said before the flame enveloped him and his Zanpakuto. "You may be disappointed, you know," Muyang murmured before swinging his Zanpakuto at Yamamoto. A raging storm burst out instantly. HAA. Yamamoto swung his Zanpakuto, and its flame got even bigger as if trying to devour Muyang's whirlwind whole. Bang! As the flame and the whirlwind collided, the fire became even fiercer that it covered the entire Skyaku Hill, and the whole Skyaku Hill was covered by dust as the aftermath, obstructing everyone's field of vision. Right after the flame burst out, Muyang used Shuunpa and reappeared beside Yoruichi. "Who's there?" Sensing someone approaching, Yoruichi instinctively attacked with her elbow. "It's me." Muyang blocked Yoruichi's attack with his palm. "Kimura. You must take Kusu away now." Muyang immediately went straight to the point without wasting even a single second. Yoruichi was taken aback at first but immediately nodded, "I got it." Yoruichi was ready to move out, but she glanced back at Muyang and said, "Be careful." "Yeah." Now that he could leave Kusu in Yoruichi's hands, Muyang was a bit relieved. With this, he would be able to escape more easily. Bang! A pillar of flame rose into the sky, and as it subsided, Yamamoto's figure in the flame was revealed, blowing away all the dust on the Skyaku Hill. "Is that all you got, brat?" Yamamoto was quite disappointed since Muyang's attack didn't do anything to him. Of course not. Muyang's Zanpakuto slowly raised his Zanpakuto that gave off a terrifying aura that intrigued even Yamamoto. Muyang slightly swung his Zanpakuto, but it left a creepy black crack in its wake. "Old man Yama, what do you think about this one then?" Above Skyaku Hill, Muyang had serious eyes as he held his Zanpakuto with both hands. Upon closer look, one would notice that Muyang's Zanpakuto was vibrating really fast. Yamamoto squinted with a solemn expression on his face. Unlike all of Muyang's previous attacks, he was aware that this one was different. He realized that he wouldn't be unscathed if he didn't take this seriously. This is Kurosaki held down his bamboo hat. This time, his expression was completely serious as he was aware of the danger. Kurosaki already placed his hands on his Zanpakuto's hilt before realizing it. However, as he looked at Yukitake, he noticed that Yukitake was also looking at him with his hands on his Zanpakuto's hilt. They both were a little surprised when they saw both of them had the same posture and expression plastered on their face but immediately smiled right after. They truly were lifelong friends. Interesting, it seems he'll have to take this seriously. Yamamoto said with a slightly serious tone. Old Yamamoto, here I come. Muyang slowly walked toward Yamamoto for a few steps before suddenly swinging down his Zanpakuto. HM. Yamamoto's eyes widened as Muyang was already in front of him, even though he saw Muyang walked really slowly toward him just now, and it was completely different from Shunpa. It was the kind of movement that he had never seen before. Even though Yamamoto was a bit surprised, his body could react in time. Right when Muyang was in front of him, Yamamoto swung his Zanpakuto, trying to repel Muyang's attack. What? When Muyang's and Yamamoto's Zanpakuto collided, everyone except Muyang couldn't contain how surprised they were, including Yamamoto, albeit only for a moment. They weren't surprised for no reason. After all, as Muyang swung his Zanpakuto down, there was a space distortion around it before completely vanishing, leaving only the hilt in Muyang's hand. It was as if Muyang was holding an invisible blade, which happened right before everyone's eyes. Before everyone could regain their composure, the blade of Muyang's Zanpakuto suddenly reappeared again as if emerging from the void and collided with Yamamoto's Zanpakuto. Even though all of this felt like it took quite some time, it actually happened in a split second. Bang! The clash between the two Zanpakutos caused pent-up energy that resembled a ripple where it collided. In a matter of seconds, that energy could no longer be contained and dispersed. At first, it only scraped the ground beneath Muyang and Yamamoto, but not long after, a layer of Skyaku Hill was leveled as well. What? When their Zanpakuto collided, Yamamoto could feel the terrifying force from Muyang's Zanpakuto. It was neither Ryatsu nor other types of energy, just raw power. The tremendous power was beyond Yamamoto's imagination. It was at least several times stronger than Muyang's previous attack. To his surprise, his arm trembled to the point that he couldn't firmly hold his Zanpakuto anymore, so he backed off and took some distance from Muyang, but he fell to the ground right after, which was even more surprising, even for him. Captain Commander. Old Man Yama. Genrisai-sensei. Witnessing this unbelievable scene, the captains were beyond surprised. The strongest Shinigami, Captain Commander Yamamoto that stood above all Shinigami in the Soul Society in 1,000 years, was forced on his knees in a square fight? Even Aizen was frightened for a moment. He was a very proud and arrogant individual that believed he stood above everyone else, be it strength or intelligence. Even though he wasn't the strongest person right now, he never doubted that he'd become the most powerful person in the future. However, he doubted himself for a second when he saw Muyang knock down Yamamoto. Then again, it was only for a short period of time. He was back to his confident self almost immediately. He believed that once he carried out his plan, everyone, including Muyang, Yamamoto, or even Soul King, would just become his stepping stone to become the strongest being. Muyang himself was a bit proud of what he just did. Even though he did use the power he had just obtained or the so-called trump card, he managed to overpower Yamamoto head-on. Muyang glanced at Aizen with a faint smile on his face. Although this was the first time he used it, he had obtained his Zanpakuto's true form. Not only did he manage to overpower Yamamoto, but he had a feeling that he'd be able to break through Aizen's Kaika Suigetsu. However, shwa shwa. In a blink of an eye, Karaku and Yukitake were already blocking Muyang's way while holding Zanpakuto in their hands, and he was on alert. At the same time, Unohana Retsu and Kuchiki Jinrei flashed in front of Yamamoto. Step aside. I'm not so weak that I need to hide behind you young guns. Yamamoto tried to stand back up bare-chested as his clothes were in tatters, revealing countless scars on his upper body. Unohana, who was about to check on him, was forced to step back as Yamamoto brushed off her hands. Good grief, don't force yourself, old man Yama. We can't just leave everything to our Captain Commander. At least let us mix in for a bit. Yes, Genrisai-sensei, don't leave us out of the fun. Kiraku and Yukitake that blocked Yamamoto from going further, caught a glimpse of Yamamoto's slightly trembling right hand. The look in their eyes changed. Was Kimura's attack so powerful that old man Yama was trembling? Ha! Cut the small talk and fight me. While they were all busy, Zaraki Kenpachi suddenly appeared behind Muyang with a crazed look on his face, swinging down his Zanpakuto toward Muyang's head. Muyang slightly sidestepped to dodge Zaraki Kenpachi's attack before putting some distance between them. So you're still hiding that much power, Kimura? Zaraki Kenpachi licked his lips. Well, as long as you can keep me entertained. Sorry, but I don't have time to fight you now, Kenpachi. Muyang looked a bit dejected, and then he turned to Kiraku and Yukitake. Sorry, this is goodbye. Do you think you can escape with several other captains and me here? Yamamoto looked at Muyang said solemnly. Old man Yama, I'm sorry I couldn't live up to your expectations. Muyang looked towards Yamamoto with an apologetic look. He didn't know how to face this old man that had done a lot for him. Then stay here and explain the situation to me. Yamamoto didn't want to let Muyang go. He didn't want his precious student besides Kiraku and Yukitake to betray Soul Society, after all. It's complicated. Muyang shook his head. Goodbye. What is he planning to do? The captains were on high alert as Muyang made it sound like he could leave any time he wanted. Had number 73. Sren Skasui. Had number 58. 10 ran. Muyang used 2 had successively in an instant, resulting in a huge smokescreen that covered Skyaku Hill. Not good. Kiraku already guessed that Muyang would obstruct everyone's vision and fled in the middle of the confusion. Kaiten Kaikatsu. Kiraku immediately used Shirkai, Bush Goma. 2 circling wind blades joined together and cleared the dust in the vicinity, restoring their vision again. However, only Muyang's voice was heard. Erasure no Kaze. Suddenly, the wind from all directions converged in the middle of them all, trapping everyone inside. Halt! Yamamoto raised his Zanpakuto, ready to break through Muyang's wind wall with his flame. However, he suddenly hesitated when he remembered what happened when his flame and Muyang's wind collided earlier, which resulted in a massive explosion, putting other captains in danger while Muyang used that chance to escape. Muyang didn't overlook this opportunity as he immediately aimed his hand toward where everyone was trapped, and a bright light was emanated from his hand, along with massive Ryatsu. Kagami Sorogoku. A cuboid crystal was suddenly erected around all captain, trapping them inside. What is this, kid? Did you invent it yourself? Kiraku glanced at the crystal wall that trapped them in disbelief. This is Unohana. Retsu cautiously tried to touch the crystal wall, and as if dropping a stone on water, Unohana's hand left a ripple as her hand passed through the crystal wall without any obstruction. All captains who saw this scene were stunned for a moment. Was this crystal wall just for show? Did it actually have no effect whatsoever? While they were still puzzled, a hand suddenly stuck out of the crystal wall on one side of the wall, to be precise, near Zaraki, which startled him as he immediately raised his Zanpakuto, ready to strike the hand down. Wait! Right before Zaraki swung his Zanpakuto down, Unohana immediately stopped him and then slowly pulled her hand out of the crystal wall. Could it be that? As Unohana pulled out her hand from the crystal wall, the other hand on the other side of the wall was also pulled into the crystal wall. Seeing this bizarre scene, everyone's puzzled eyes were focused on Unohana. This must be the kid that Captain Kimura invented by himself. Based on what I feel when I touched the crystal wall just now, I can tell that it was the combination of several other kid like Kaiman, Kyak, Tozench, Dank, and several other kid. That's amazing. Kiraku said in awe while other captains were nodding except for Zaraki, who was basically clueless when it came to kid. Even these captains couldn't do something like that, and as far as they knew, Muyang wasn't used to be so good at kid. Realizing they had no means to break through this kid, the captains immediately shifted their gazes to the sky, where Muyang was floating, wondering what he was planning to do by trapping everyone in one place. Muyang's Zanpakuto suddenly glowed, and Muyang thrust it forward. As if entering another dimension, half of the blade disappeared. That's... The captains were taken aback upon witnessing this scene. That was exactly the same motion when the Shinigami opened Senkamen to Soul Society from Human World. However, the Senkamen in Soul Society had fixed locations, and it couldn't be opened wherever one wanted, which made everyone suspect that Muyang's Zanpakuto had the power to do so. Muyang twisted his arm, and his Zanpakuto was enveloped in white light. To everyone's surprise, a black rift appeared in the air. The pitch-black rift gave them creeps as if they were staring right into the abyss. What on earth is that? Yukitake couldn't help but stare at the black rift next to Muyang. Beats me. Kuraku also couldn't conceal the shock on his face anymore. Don't tell me. Aizen's eyes flashed as he looked at the black rift, but he pretended to be astonished as if seeing something he has never seen in person before. Susukuen, do you know what that is? Kuraku asked when he saw the look on Aizen's face. That rift, I've seen it once in a book, and it looks very similar to the Garganta that the Hollow used, but there's just no way. Does this mean Captain Kimura is in cahoots with the Hollow? Garganta? Kuraku shook his head. No, Susukuen, you've only seen it in the book, so it can't be helped if you mistake it for a Garganta. If it really is a Garganta, we should be able to feel the Hollow's Ryatsu coming from that rift, so this must be something else. Oh, I see. Aizen's eyes flashed, and a faint smile was shown on the corner of his mouth. A bizarre light was exuded from Aizen's Zanpakuto, affecting everyone without them noticing. Suddenly, the captains shuddered before looking towards Muyang in disbelief, as if seeing something unbelievable. It was even worse in Yamamoto's case as his Ryatsu spiked once again, and the flame raging around him. In everyone's eyes, there were so many hollows swarming the rift now, and there was a big one behind them all. The captains couldn't quite see it, but they certainly felt the sickening and monstrous Ryatsu behind the rift. Aizen just smiled faintly when he saw the captain's reaction. Although Muyang was stronger than he expected, it all played in his favor. Because he managed to inject the hollow substance into Muyang's body, and the news about Muyang and the later known as Vizard already spread among the captains, his plan went smoother. Of course, Muyang didn't know that Aizen once again set him up. He simply used his kid to trap them to give him enough time to escape, that's all, and now was obviously the perfect time to escape. Muyang's plan was to break through the Soul Society space using his own spatial technique. At this point, Muyang was standing in front of the rift before looking back at everyone below with sad eyes for one last time. Goodbye old Yamamoto, Kuraku, Yukitake, Kenpachi, and Retsu, goodbye, Soul Society, and goodbye, Aizen. Your Kaika Suigetsu won't work against me anymore, but I end up showing too much of my trick this time, so, at the very least, I can count on you not to let me down next time. Finally, Muyang walked into the spatial rift in front of him. Leave it to me. As Muyang walked into the crack, a massive Ryatsu burst from Yamamoto, destroying the crystal wall around him. With one swing, Raijin Jaka unleashed the burning hot flame that went straight into the spatial rift, aiming for Muyang. Unfortunately, the spatial rift closed as sudden as it appeared, and Yamamoto's last attack didn't connect. He didn't understand why Yamamoto seemed angrier and more aggressive when he was about to leave, but there was nothing he could do at this point. After Muyang left, Yamamoto punched the ground in fury, creating a big hole below him. Old man Yama. Genrisai sensei. Kuraku and Yukitake immediately ran towards Yamamoto. They didn't expect Yamamoto would be this angry. Muyang actually threw away his pride as a Shinigami and stoop as low as joining the Hollow. He'll never forgive something like that. Yamamoto sheathed his Zanpakuto as he turned around toward the remaining captains. The disappointment in his face couldn't be concealed. After all, this was Gotei 13's biggest loss in history, leaving only 3 captains in their rank. Let's go back for now. We must restore stability and order in Siriidii first. The look on Yamamoto's face returned to usual, his eyes were closed-slit as usual, and his tone was calm once again. All captains just nodded in silence despite how reluctant they were after all that happened, and then returned to their respective divisions. Kiraku and Yukitake looked at each other before returning to their own divisions. Because of what happened, they had to restore order in Siriidii and put everyone at ease because they must have felt the massive Ryatsu during Muyang and Yamamoto's battle just now. With that in mind, Kiraku glanced at Aizen for a moment before returning to his division. In the dimension that connected Soul Society, Human World, and Hueco Mundo. This place Muyang was standing on a foothold comprised by Raisher, looking around in the dark void, so this is the dimensional gap between worlds. However, the place Muyang was in right now resembled Garganta leading to the Hueco Mundo than the Dangai that connected Soul Society and Human World. Dangai had cry on each side of the wall after all, but this place was just a pitch-black void. Although he had used this spatial technique before, this was the first time Muyang used it to travel between 2 different worlds like this. Muyang had no guarantee that he could reach Human World without a hitch. However, he was ready for 1 or 2 unexpected events. With that in mind, Muyang made sure not to be rash. He was no longer in danger anyway now, so all he had to do now was find the way to the Human World. He sheathed his Zanpakuto and began exploring. Meanwhile, Yoruichi got away with Kusu in tow thanks to Muyang for being such a competent bait. She knew the ins and outs of Siriidii, and with the detection ability from Kusu's Zanpakutos, they easily left Siriidii without alarming anyone. Yoruichi-san, what are we going to do next? Shortly after leaving Siriidii, Kusu and Yoruichi stopped before looking back at Siriidii for one last time. Kusu clearly seemed reluctant, but she asked Yoruichi anyway. Well, we can't go back to Godii 13 anymore after what happened. Yoruichi responded when she noticed the hesitant look on Kusu's face, but she frowned shortly after. When you're in Skyaku Hill earlier, how did you find Aizen, Kusu? Only you noticed that he was hiding there, and I believe he must have used Kaika Suigetsu at that time. Yeah. Kusu cast aside all the thoughts in her heart at the moment and stroked her Zanpakuto. My Kamizen no Kyumo's ability is more than just ordinary perception. It can even look into others' hearts as long as they are in its range. What? Yoruichi was genuinely shocked and she heard Kusu's explanation. Mind reading. That's one way you can put it. Kusu then smiled and said, of course, at my current level, perceiving others' emotions is the most I can do, and I have to be very close to my target in order to do so. I can catch a fraction of people's thought, though, but it may take 100 years or even more to learn mind reading. No matter how powerful Zanpakuto's ability was, it depended on its owner themselves whether they could learn or further develop its ability. There were only a few people who had completely awakened their Zanpakuto, like Captain Commander Yamamoto. Okay, let's go to Kaku's place first. Yoruichi cast her thoughts aside and immediately stood up. Shiba Kaku. Well, we have to find her before we can go to the Human World and rendezvous with Kisuke. Captain, he's... Kusu was looking back toward the direction of Siriidii. It was clear that she was worried about Muyang. After all, Muyang stayed behind to ensure their escape, and there were other captains beside Yamamoto there. Yoruichi couldn't blame Kusu for her behavior. She has accompanied Muyang for more than 100 years, and everyone knew how she felt about Muyang. In fact, it would be weird if she wasn't worried about him. They both could feel massive Ryatsu colliding with each other, but Yoruichi decided to brush it off with a smile to put Kusu at ease. Don't worry, it's Kimura we're talking about. Have faith in him. Even if he can't win, he should have no problem escaping. Besides, don't underestimate a captain. Yoruichi's words reminded Kusu of the strength of her captain that she had served for years, putting her at ease as she finally smiled for the first time. Bang! A sudden spike of Ryatsu occurred on Skyaku Hill, surprising Yoruchi and Kusu even though they were quite far away from there, which made them worry once again. This is Captain Commander's Ryatsu, but why is it so rough? Even from our distance, his anger was so apparent as if it's directed to us. Bang! Following the sudden spike of Ryatsu, a burst of flame towered high into the sky, dyeing the whole sky red. Yoruchi-san. Even if she had learned Bankai, the moment Yamamoto's Ryatsu burst forth to the sky, Kusu couldn't hide her anxiety. Although I don't know what pisses Captain Commander so much, we gotta leave as soon as possible. Besides, I can't feel Kimura's Ryatsu anymore. I think he's escaped already. Kusu immediately closed her eyes and then sighed in relief. You're right. Captain indeed has left. Then we should get going too. We will hide at Kaku's place for a while. When the time is right, we'll go to the human world and rendezvous with Kisuke. Understood. They then headed toward the direction of Rukongai. This place really is. As Muyang stood in the void and looked around, as hard it was for him to admit, he knew deep down that he was lost. Then again, this was his first time, so it couldn't be helped. Muyang decided to just walk forward. Even though he didn't know which way led to the human world, at least he wouldn't end up in Siriidii if he kept pressing forward. The foothold comprised of Reisher followed Muyang's walking pace as he pressed onward, and Muyang eventually sensed a Ryatsu from a certain direction, so Muyang followed it. However, the closer he got to that Ryatsu, the clearer the frown on his face because judging from the Ryatsu, Muyang knew for sure that this way didn't lead to the human world. Muyang sensed an existence beyond his knowledge, and the subtle bad vibe he got was clearly coming from that spatial distortion. However, at the same time, the Ryatsu was somehow familiar, like that of Hikifune Kiryo's, but different from the Kiryo in his knowledge. Muyang then reached out, trying to check what lied beyond the spatial distortion ahead of him. Bzztt. Muyang was zapped by unknown energy as soon as he reached out his hand, and even though it wasn't particularly strong, Muyang backpedaled with horror in his eyes. Thighs is. Right when Muyang was zapped by the unknown energy, everything around him went bright, and suddenly he could see the world hidden behind the spatial distortion. There were huge circular pillars as far as Muyang could see, and there were 5 floating discs, while suspended higher still was a large cylindrical structure that had a conical top and bottom. What is this place? I've never seen it in the anime in my previous life. However, the Ryatsu is oddly familiar. What is going on here? Muyang was at a loss. He had never seen this place when he watched the anime or read the manga. Was this still Siriidii? Although Muyang was really curious about the world that he just saw due to the somewhat familiar Ryatsu he felt and his curiosity about that place that he never saw before, there was something inside him that made him reluctant to keep going. Let's save this place for later. Muyang decided to walk back into the spatial rift and was determined to return to that place once he built up more strength. After all, there was no telling what awaited him in that unknown world. Muyang took the last glance into the 5 floating discs as he stepped into the spatial rift. Somewhere in that world, a large and broad man with a bald head, red eyes, bushy eyebrows, and a long black beard suddenly raised his head and looked toward a certain direction as if detecting a foreign presence. Gatanden. HM. An obese woman also raised her head from a pile of food in front of her. Judging from her hairstyle and color alone, one might have a hard time telling, but it was Hikifune Kiryo who was promoted to 0 division. As she stuffed the food down her throat, she was taken aback for a moment. Why did I feel Lil Yang Yang's Ryatsu just now? It must be my imagination. This is Soul King Palace, so there's no way Lil Yang Yang can come here. I better finish this as fast as I can, I still have more to eat. Hikifune Kiryo immediately brushed off that thought and focused on her food once again. Muyang didn't realize that place was the famous Soul King Palace, where Hikifune Kiryo resided now. However, even if he did know, he would not go in without permission. That place just gave off a mysterious feeling. Besides, he wouldn't enter a place carelessly if he didn't know anything about it. It should be around here. Muyang used his spatial ability once again. As his Zanpakuto glowed, he could feel the erasure from the spatial rift that he opened, and it felt different from the erasure in Soul Society, meaning that spatial rift led elsewhere. As long as it didn't lead to Soul Society, he wouldn't mind. Dark and desolate sky. A crescent moon. An endless white desert. There were some tree-like objects on the ground, but they turned out to be quartz-like minerals. The extremely vast Hueco Mundo that no one knew how big it actually was, nor how many hollows were there in that place. This place was where Muyang ended up this time. His brows furrowed as he looked into the crescent moon and sighed, "It's Hueco Mundo this time, huh?" He shook his head helplessly. His first time using the spatial ability to travel through worlds turned out to be quite a disaster. However, since Hueco Mundo didn't have that many formidable character, he should be okay. Even a Vasto Lord was no match against him at this point anyway. Besides, he has never been here before, so he might as well take a look around. But why can't I feel the slightest Ryatsu? Is there even any hollow here? The erasure in Hueco Mundo and Soul Society was indeed different, but still, Muyang couldn't feel a trace of Ryatsu whatsoever, which led him to such a conclusion. Muyang just shook his head and pressed onward. He'd eventually find a living being there as long as he kept walking. Before Muyang could take a step, something weird happened to him. A Ryatsu that didn't belong to him burst forth from within his body, along with an unknown emotion, as if trying to rob him of his consciousness. HNGGH. Along with his grunt, Muyang tried his best to suppress that Ryatsu with his own Ryatsu. After a fierce battle for quite some time, he finally sighed in relief after regaining control over his body. He didn't expect that the hollowification symptom would happen again. Thankfully, he could temporarily suppress it this time, but there was no telling he could do so. He might not be able to hold it down at some point later on. He was supposed to rendezvous with Urahara, yet he was stuck there in Hueco Mundo without knowing when he could go to the human world. He still hasn't grasped the knack to use his spatial ability, after all. This situation was truly uncalled for. If he couldn't rendezvous with Urahara and Shinju, then what was the point of letting Aizen insert that hollow soul within him? At first, Muyang had unwavering confidence that he didn't need to stop Aizen from inserting the hollow soul into him because he was strong enough to brush off the hollowification symptom that Urahara should have enough time to figure out the solution. But the same couldn't be said to Shinji and the rest, and now he was discouraged because that tragedy befell them due to his hesitation. He wouldn't be able to rest easy until Shinji and others were back to normal, and to make matters worse, he didn't know how to go to the human world. Since there was no one here in Hueco Mundo, Muyang decided to learn more about the new ability of his Zanpakuto before going to the human world to find Shinji. With that in mind, Muyang looked around to find a suitable place to learn and explore the new ability of his Zanpakuto. This way, I think. Muyang saw what seemed to be a small mountain in the distance and decided to go there to find the perfect place to train. Muyang at first made his way there by walking but eventually switched to running. The mountain didn't seem that far at first glance, but it didn't seem to be any closer even after Muyang ran for a while. Muyang squinted and found a corpse not too far away. Shwa. He used Shuanpa and immediately observed the corpse under his feet. It had a mask on its face and a hole on its chest, so there was no doubt that it was a hollow, and its size was quite enormous, about several floors high. After making sure the hollow was dead, Muyang kicked its body, turning it around, and observed its body. Not long after, he frowned as he found no injury whatsoever on the hollow's body, yet it was dead, so what was the cause of its death? Even after racking his brain for a while, he couldn't figure out the cause behind the hollow's death. However, he did notice the horrified eyes of the hollow that remained even after its death. Was it scared to death? But it was hollow, so that was impossible. Muyang saw another dead body lying on the ground not too far away. He immediately used Shuanpa and checked on the corpse, and it shocked him because it was in the exact same condition as the one earlier. Things seemed to be getting more and more interesting. Muyang kept walking and found more corpse on his way, pointing toward one direction. All of the corpses were exactly in the same state. As he saw more and more corpses, Muyang was starting to have a rough idea about what was going on here. These hollows were not scared to death, and the only possible reason behind their death was because of the Ryatsu that was so overwhelming that they couldn't keep their consciousness intact, just like what happened to ordinary humans when they were in the presence of someone with a really strong Ryatsu. Well, judging from what he knew in Hueco Mundo, the only one who was capable of this was the first Espada, Coyote Stark, the laid-back man who'd serve under Aizen in the future. Upon reaching that conclusion, Muyang couldn't contain his excitement. After all, this would be the original Hueco Mundo arc. If he followed these hollows' corpses, he should be able to find the first Espada, with the aspect of death solitude, even though he hasn't sensed his Ryatsu until now. Muyang picked up his pace without him realizing it, as the thought of seeing Stark soon really excited him. Even though he has been friends with Shinji for more than 100 years, he just couldn't help it as he has always admired him. Bang! Muyang suddenly felt a clash of Ryatsu and turned his head toward that direction. Boom! Boom! This is even Kusu's Ryatsu is no match against this. It's clearly on a captain's level. Muyang murmured as he felt the Ryatsu so clearly even though it was so far away from him. After glancing at the hollows' corpses that stretched out for as far as his eyes could, Muyang hesitated a little. He was wondering whether he should keep going to find Stark or check out what happened where he felt that Ryatsu. After pondering for a moment, Muyang decided to go another way, where he felt the Ryatsu earlier. Considering Stark's personality, he'd be too lazy to move around too much anyway, so he could always find him later. Unlike when Muyang followed the hollows' corpses earlier, he couldn't take his sweet time now. He used Shuanpa to reach the location where the battle took place. Since there shouldn't be Arankar yet now, and the Ryatsu he felt earlier was that of a captain level, it had to be a Minos of Vasto Lord level. Who was it? Stark. It shouldn't be him, Barragan. If it were him, there must be a large group of hollow accompanying him. He's the self-proclaimed king of Hueco Mundo after all, Harabel. Or was it Ulquiorra? Muyang was smiling ears to ears as he was looking forward to what kind of surprise he'd see. Female hollows only needs to submit to the strong. A humanoid hollow with 3 pairs of wings and a small hole on his forehead was floating in the air with a condescending attitude. That hollow's word was directed to a tall female hollow with olive skin, aqua-green eyes, thick eyelashes, and short golden blonde hair. Most of her body was covered in white armor, and her right hand, which was also her weapon, took the form of a broadsword, which resembled an elongated shark tooth. The sword possessed gill markings along either side of the blade. Female hollow, I will give you 2 options. You can either submit to me or die by my hands. TSK. The female hollow on the ground held her right hand that had several cracks while looking towards the hollow in the air, with a hint of frustration in her eyes. Clearly, she was losing here. You got something to say? The hollow closed his eyes and reached out his pale white hands toward the female hollow's direction, a complete contrast with his pitch-black wings. The weak submits to the strong, and females succumb to males. This is the most basic rule here, no. Female hollow, submit to me, Lord Vladimir Eric. Only I deserve to claim a female hollow of your caliber as mine. Behold. The female hollow immediately assumed her fighting stance with a sharp gaze toward the other hollow, who claimed to be Vladimir Eric. Although the difference in strength between her and her opponent was clear, she'd rather fight to death rather than surrender to her opponent. Seeing the female hollow still planned to go against him despite her miserable state, Vladimir Eric ran out of patience. It looks like you are going to defy me until the bitter end. Even though he said it calmly, the female hollow still shook due to the sheer amount of Ryatsu Vladimir let out. Since you're insisting, I'll grant your wish to die as a warrior. Vladimir Eric looked at the woman with condescending eyes, and his tone suddenly sounded cold. Tell me your name, that's the least I can do to honor your death. Haribel, Tyr Haribel. Haribel, huh? Vladimir then reached out with his right hand, and a powerful Ryatsu burst out. The intensity of the Ryatsu alone made it hard for Haribel to stand straight. Although both of them were Vastolord, the difference in strength between them was clear as day. You should be proud to die by my hands. Inferno Blast. An overwhelming Ryatsu burst forth, along with scorching hot lava that came out of nowhere. What? Haribel was startled when she felt the menacing aura and concentrated her own Ryatsu to the point that she was shrouded in yellow light. As Vladimir waved his hand, the lava headed straight for Haribel at an unbelievable speed. Everyone's always so dazzling at their last moment. Even the weak and worthless Hollow can display such radiance the moment before they vanished. Hollow named Haribel, what kind of spectacle will you show me before you perish? It's obviously more exciting to destroy beautiful things, so I'm looking forward to it. Damn! Seeing a bunch of attacks flying towards him, Haribel mustered all of her Ryatsu on her right hand to the point that it was glowing in a golden yellow color. Zero. The concentrated Ryatsu was unleashed to counter the attack directed at her. That Zero she just fired was the strongest attack Haribel could use at this moment, so she was out of juice after she fired it, and if her opponent were still alive after that attack, she would be done for. Boom! Their attack collided, causing an extremely loud sound, and covered the area in blinding light. The impact of their attack was so intense, too, that Haribel was forced to step back and duck as the dust hindered her sight. Bang! Did it work? Haribel slowly stood back up, with some dust covering her body. She seemed a bit relieved when she saw the smoke in the sky. You wish. A cold voice came from the air. What? Haribel turned pale almost immediately. An overwhelming Ryatsu surged forth, and a silhouette could be seen floating in the sky. With one flick of the silhouette's wings, a hurricane was summoned, blowing the dust around him away. Vladimir was floating in the air, completely unscathed. He just seemed slightly dirty due to the dust that stuck on him. Do you think a Zero of that level will work on me? Just perish before my might like the weak you are. But it's praiseworthy that a weakling like you could tarnish me with some dust, but sadly that won't change anything. The fiery red lava appeared once again while Haribel was losing her will to fight because her strongest attack didn't even scratch her opponent. Ha 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 ha. Vladimir took his sweet time and teased Haribel as the speed of his attack was slower than earlier, but that wasn't a problem since Haribel had already lost her will to fight. Seeing the lava was steadily closing in, Haribel closed her eyes in despair, accepting her fate. Perhaps this is salvation. A thought suddenly flashed in Haribel's head. Bakad number 81. Dank. The moment Vladimir's attack almost hit Haribel. Bakad number 81. Dank. A translucent barrier was suddenly erected in front of Haribel. Bang! Vladimir's attack hit the barrier and immediately caused an explosion. The impact of the explosion was quite a spectacle as the dust around them rose high that it hindered everyone's line of sight. This is. Haribel was surprised as the barrier in front of her could block Vladimir's terrifying attack even though it seemed so fragile. Haribel? Muyang asked with a hint of doubt. It couldn't be helped as the female Hollow in front of him resembled the Haribel that he knew, yet the Haribel with he knew should be really strong. After all, she was the third Espada who held the aspect of death sacrifice. Thank you for saving me. Even though Haribel was too startled to say anything at first, she immediately regained her composure and thanked the man that saved her. The man was quite good-looking, but he had no mask on his face, and there was no hole anywhere on his body. Once she noticed Muyang's distinct difference with Hollow, she realized that Muyang was not a Hollow, but what made her so surprised was when she noticed Muyang was wearing black clothes and a sword hanging on his waist, meaning he was a Shinigami. Harabelle was startled once again, but only for a moment. Even though she didn't know why a Shinigami saved her, it was an undeniable fact. Muyang just had a hard time processing everything when he saw Harabelle was this weak and even thanked him for saving her. I didn't expect another insect would sneak in and challenge me. What's with today and you ignorant insects? A voice said from the sky. You know what infuriates me the most, Harabelle? You actually refused my invitation, yet here you are, begging help from a lowly Shinigami. Muyang sure couldn't let that one slide. Vladimir's condescending tone and remarks ruined his mood, and what did he mean by a lowly Shinigami? Muyang shifted his gaze towards the hollow in the air. He had 3 pairs of jet black wings, pale white skin, and the purple and black patterns on his mask that was partially damaged, revealing a little bit of his face and a small hole in his forehead. Who are you? Muyang just couldn't help but ask as this hollow managed to overpower Harabelle, yet he has never seen him in the manga in his previous life. He had a pair extra wings compared to Ulquiorra. Did that make him stronger than Ulquiorra then? Ignorant Shinigami. Vladimir suddenly snapped but then calmed down almost immediately. Then again, this may be your first time seeing me, so I can't blame you for your ignorance. Muyang frowned as this was his first time seeing someone this arrogant. Since you can stop my attack, I'll give you a special treatment and tell you my name. Vladimir looked down at Muyang with condescending eyes. My name is Vladimir. Be grateful that you get to hear my name before you die. Now, let me hear your name. And there's no need to thank me. As someone who can stop my attack, you at least deserve that much. Muyang started to lose his patience. Seeing someone arrogant was nothing new for him, but this was his first time seeing someone whose arrogance knew no bound. Unfortunately, I had a habit of never giving my name to those that will die by my hands. The atmosphere instantly became tense as Muyang and Vladimir were eyeing each other with killing intent. Oh, you actually decline my generosity. Vladimir shook his head out of pity, and with one flap of his wings, the overwhelming Ryatsu immediately filled the air. It's a shame, but you'll have to die. Muyang immediately looked up as he felt the terrifying Ryatsu and saw massive fire as if the sky itself was on fire. Even though it was nowhere near the level of Yamamoto's flame, he knew he couldn't take it lightly. Doomsday. Although you have angered me, it is hard to find someone as strong as you. I'll use this move to end your life out of respect for your strength. As the name suggests, it can destroy the whole world, so you can be proud of yourself that you'll die with this move. Vladimir looked at Muyang and Harabelle with pitiful eyes. It has been so long since he found someone as strong as them, yet they would die this quick. Seeing the crimson sky, Harabelle was shaking. She just couldn't believe the difference in strength between them was this far apart. Although that might be a little troublesome to deal with, but Muyang seemed to be seeing the sky and the sky. If you think that will be enough to kill me, then you're just an arrogant hollow, nothing more. Even Yamamoto's flame couldn't defeat him, yet this hollow thought he could kill him with this fire that was nothing but flashy. Muyang grabbed Harabelle and used Shuanpa, reappearing a few hundred meters away from the area of impact. He saw that TE fire razed the place he stood earlier without leaving any surface unburned. It seems that he is not just all talk. Muyang nodded as not only did the attack cover a huge area, its destructive power was also extraordinary. An average captain would be seriously injured if they weren't fast enough to dodge the attack. Muyang, who thought that was the extent of Vladimir's move, was surprised as the fire that bombarded the ground earlier rose once again and headed straight toward Muyang. What? Is it targeting me no matter where I go? Muyang saved the thinking for later, grabbed Harabelle, and used Shuanpa once again to dodge the flame. Not even in his wildest imagination would he think that Harabelle would drag anyone down, but it was clear that she was nothing but a burden in this scenario. Muyang reappeared several meters away, but the flame kept following him. Shwa 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 shwa. Muyang kept using Shunpa to dodge, but the flame was following him closely no matter how far he moved. This is really troublesome, Muyang murmured as he continuously dodged the attack. At this time, Haribel firmly held on to Muyang and looked at Muyang with eyes full of emotion. The man beside her didn't even know her, yet he went this far to protect her. Schwa. Muyang felt like he was in trouble until he glanced at Vladimir and found that his eyes were moving around, following Muyang's movement. He smiled and immediately used Shunpa and appeared behind Vladimir. Vladimir was startled and immediately used Sonido, putting distance between him and Muyang. As I thought, you control your flame with your eyes. Muyang said with a smile after realizing that the flame didn't immediately follow him this time. It seems I have to admit that you are not just a mere insect. Vladimir said solemnly, but clearly he sounded different from earlier. Muyang himself was surprised even though he guessed it right. Although he didn't show it on his face, he was already screaming deep down, controlling fire with your eyes? Do you think this is Amaterasu or some shit? Although the flame itself wasn't a threat for Muyang, the ability to freely control it with his eyes completely changed the situation. Muyang used Shunpa and put quite a distance between him and Vladimir, laid Haribel on the ground, and returned in front of Vladimir once again. I guess I have to get a little serious too. Muyang drew his Zanpakuto from the waist, pointing it at Vladimir. Shinigami, Kimura Muyang, he'll be taking your life. Shinigami, Muyang, he'll be taking your life. Muyang said with a solemn look on his face as he held his Zanpakuto. Even with their distance, Vladimir could vividly feel as if he was already cut by Muyang's Zanpakuto. My name is Vladimir Eric, Shinigami. You may be somewhat capable, but all forms of struggle are futile before my presence. Vladimir spread his hand, and Ryatsu was concentrated on his palm. Shimatsu no Ken. A purple crystal-clear energy sword suddenly appeared on the top of Muyang's head. It was such a beautiful and elegant sword that no one would think it could kill anyone. Swish. As Vladimir waved his hand, the energy sword was plunged down at a speed that was invisible to the naked eye. Muyang reacted in time and used Shunpa, instantly disappearing from the spot. Swish. The moment Muyang dodged the attack and looked back at the place where he stood earlier, his pupils dilated as there was a huge hole there. Muyang turned towards Vladimir and realized that he had underestimated him. Although he had never seen him in the anime in his previous life, his strength was the real deal. Even judging from the move just now, it was impeccable in terms of speed and destructive power. Not to mention his enemy was capable of concentrating the Ryatsu to such a level that not a trace of it leaked out. Sanada, Kaze no Sora. Muyang immediately released his Zanpakuto as he acknowledged his enemy as a threat. A Shinigami's Zanpakuto. Vladimir glanced at the Zanpakuto in Muyang's hands and said solemnly. However, you're still no match for me even if you release your Zanpakuto. Just like earlier, Vladimir spread his hand, and immediately waved it. Swish. Seeing this familiar movement, Muyang was startled and immediately used Shunpa. Sure enough, another bottomless hole was formed below where Muyang used to stand. Unlike most big moves, Muyang couldn't feel any concentrated Ryatsu even after Vladimir launched this attack, which made it tricky as he had to observe him thoroughly if he wanted to dodge the attack. Muyang let his guard down when he managed to dodge Vladimir's attack that he failed to notice that the flame that Vladimir controlled with his eyes was ready to strike from behind. He barely managed to dodge the attack, but he suddenly had a bad feeling. Sure enough, right after he dodged the flame, the purple energy sword was already waiting above his head, ready to pierce his head. Muyang's survival instinct kicked in, and he immediately twisted his body and repelled the purple energy sword with his Zanpakuto that was covered in azure Ryatsu. Bang! As soon as Muyang's Zanpakuto came into contact with the energy sword in the air, he could feel a powerful force coming from the edge of the blade, which turned out to be the energy that was stored in the energy sword that exploded upon impact. Muyang was genuinely impressed by this move as it released all of its stored energy upon impact. Hangetsu. A semicircular azure compressed air blade came out of Muyang's Zanpakuto as he swung it. Boom! The impact lit the sky with bright light, and the purple energy sword was reduced to nothingness when the compressed air blade hit it. Muyang slowly turned towards Vladimir while holding his Zanpakuto. He had to admit that this hollow was really an interesting opponent. I have to admit that you are the most powerful opponent I have ever met, Shinigami. Vladimir said with a hint of joy in his tone, to think that a mere Shinigami can block my Shimatsu no Ken head-on, the world is vast indeed. However, don't think you have a chance just because you block my Shimatsu no Ken. Get ready if you don't want to die, Shinigami. Don't blame me for not giving you a chance later. Then again, you can prepare all you want, but it'll be futile before my absolute power. Vladimir said condescendingly as more and more energy swords started to materialize, pointed toward Muyang. Although Muyang couldn't feel the slightest ryatsu from the energy swords, he now knew it had stored energy inside. Even one energy sword stored quite a lot of energy, and this time, there were numerous swords. Get ready, Shinigami. Make sure to make the most of your last moment. Vladimir said with a proud smile as he was surrounded by the energy swords. Sorry, I forgot your name. Haribel was worried about Muyang when he saw the purple energy swords in the air. Although she didn't feel a trace of ryatsu coming from it, she saw how deadly it was earlier and immediately knew that it was far stronger than her strongest Zero. However, Muyang just chuckled as he stretched his left foot from his right foot and raised his hand, pointing it at Vladimir with steadily rising ryatsu. Limit of the thousands hands, respectful hands, unable to touch the darkness. Shooting hands unable to reflect the blue sky. The road that basks in light, the wind that ignited the embers, time that gathers when both are together, there is no need to be hesitant, obey my orders. Light bullets, 8 bodies, 9 items, Book of Heaven, Disease Treasure, Great Will, Grey Fortress Tower. Aim far away, scatter brightly and cleanly when fired. The sky seemed to turn almost instantly, and terrifying ryatsu was exuded behind Muyang, followed by several balls of light. Had number 91. Senj Tente. As Muyang finished his chanting, the balls of light behind him immediately flew straight at Vladimir. Vladimir's complexion slightly changed as he felt the threat from the ball of lights aimed at him. In response, he flapped his wings, and one of his energy swords intercepted Muyang's head. Bang bang bang. As the attacks collided, a loud explosion occurred, blowing everything nearby away. That's the first time I can use number 90's head in actual combat. That feels pretty good. Seeing the massive explosion due to his and Vladimir's attack, Muyang nodded in satisfaction. He couldn't help but remember the first time he used Senj Tente more than 100 years ago during his fight with Yamamoto. Back then, he thought it shouldn't be that hard to master number 90's head, but the first time he used it in combat turned out to be a failure. Seeing how much progress he had made, considering he successfully used Senj Tente just now, he just couldn't contain the smile on his face. What are you grinning at? It's not that powerful anyway. Vladimir's displeased voice came from in the sky as he descended with a grumpy face. Shinigami, you really annoyed me. Unforgivable. Unfortunately for him, he took a little bit of damage during their last exchange as he couldn't completely dodge the impact of their attack. Vladimir spread his hand once again, and a translucent energy sword appeared once again, but the color was clearly different this time as it was a dark purple energy sword this time. Even though the difference was just in color, Muyang could feel that it was more powerful than the last one. Shimatsu no Ha. The aura around Vladimir suddenly changed as he held that particular energy sword in his hand. Scorched Earth. Vladimir waved the energy sword in his hand, and a scorching flame suddenly sprang out from the ground. Muyang used Shuanpa to escape to the air. He was surprised when he saw the devoured everything on the ground as if it were alive. Doomsday. Another flame was ready to devour Muyang from the sky. Muyang was about to use Shuanpa as he saw this when suddenly. Hametsu no Jigaku. A circular Ryatsu wave suddenly spread out with Vladimir as the center, instantly covering the entire area. Dong! Muyang gasped as he looked at the translucent wall of light in front of him in disbelief. It turned out to be a barrier that prevented him from escaping or even use Shuunpa. Scorched earth, doomsday, Hametsu no Jigaku. Vladimir walked slowly toward Muyang. During everything that just happened, the minor wound on his body had already healed, and the usual condescending look was plastered on his face. As you can see, everything within 100 meters around me will be caught in this Hametsu no Jigaku. This is my territory, and you can't escape. Meeting me is both your greatest luck and misfortune. As Vladimir rose the energy sword in his hand, the flame around him rampaged and headed straight toward Muyang from all directions. It's over, Shinigami. It's over, Shinigami. Vladimir had a cold expression on his face as he waved the Shimatsu no Ha in his hand, and the flames from all directions went straight for Muyang as if they had received a command. Haribel, who saw this terrifying scene outside the barrier, gasped in surprise. Could Muyang withstand such an overwhelming attack? Humph. Muyang suddenly swung the Zanpakuto in his hand, and a gust of wind instantly rose, blowing away the flames that came his way. Is that all? That's supposed to be my line. Vladimir said coldly. The flame that Muyang blew away immediately converged and then rushed towards Muyang once again. No matter how many times these flames were blown away, they would reconverge again. It seemed that he had to think of another way. Muyang turned his eyes and looked at the barrier that was called Doomsday. Although the barrier prevented him from using Shuunpa, he should be able to destroy it if he wanted to. It's useless. Vladimir said as if he had seen through what Muyang was thinking. Did you not hear what I said at the beginning? Everything within 100 radius around me is affected by this Hametsu no Jigaku. It's pointless to destroy the barrier. As long as you're within the range, you will not be able to escape from my Hametsu no Jigaku. Didn't you notice that it cover a wider area now compared to the beginning? Muyang was shocked. He glanced around and realized that Vladimir was telling the truth. At the moment, Hametsu no Jigaku indeed covered more area than the beginning. He'd be caught again if he only escaped for a brief moment. If you keep running, I think the female hollow that you saved earlier will be a casualty. Vladimir said it with a teasing smile on his face as if looking forward to seeing Muyang's reaction. Muyang narrowed his eyes, and sure enough, there were less than 100 meters between where Haribel was now and the Hametsu no Jigaku. If he kept running away, Haribel would be dragged into this, and considering her state right now, she wouldn't be able to withstand Vladimir's attack. Ah shit. I'm still exhausted from fighting old man Yama. Muyang twisted his neck. I thought I can win without trying so hard, but it seems that's not going to fly. Well, now that it has come to this, let's get to it. Muyang tossed his Zanpakuto to the side. Swish. Followed by a flash of the blade, Muyang was already behind Vladimir, holding the Zanpakuto in his hand with blood dripping from its blade. SHTTTT. Blood spurted from Vladimir's neck. Swish. Vladimir swung the Shimatsu no Ha in his hand the moment he felt blood spurting from his neck, leaving a purple light in the air. Swoosh. Muyang's figure flashed, and Vladimir's furious attack missed. As the blade flashed again, Vladimir's chest was severely cut that his bone was laid bare. Before Vladimir could react, Muyang was already in front of Vladimir once again with his Zanpakuto pointed at Vladimir and a faint smile on his face. Do you understand now? I can kill you before you can even react if I want to. A faint aura rose from the edge of Muyang's Zanpakuto that Vladimir was trembling. Although your ability is indeed very powerful, it requires you to follow my movement with your eyes. And from our exchange just now, it was clear that you weren't capable to do so. Vladimir was surprised beyond belief as he never thought this kind of outcome would be possible. He never expected that there was someone out there, whose movement was so fast that he couldn't follow it. No. Vladimir was baffled by this fact. If his opponent was this strong, why didn't he kill him right from the start? Why did he hold back and even took such a roundabout way? Could it be that he normally wasn't that fast? Either that or there was a drawback if he exerted that much speed. Such thought crossed Vladimir's mind as he looked at Muyang with observant eyes. This guy. Seeing the look on Vladimir's face, Muyang knew that he must have figured out something. Although his opponent was arrogant as if he didn't care about anything, he turned out to be such a rational and observant guy. A jolt of lightning seeped into Muyang's body, reinforcing the muscle on his legs. Swish. Muyang's body disappeared in an instant, and reappeared in front of Vladimir, striking him down with his Zanpakuto. Right when Muyang was about to swing down his Zanpakuto, a wall of flame was spewed from Vladimir's body. Muyang was surprised by this unexpected turn of events and immediately used Shuanpa to dodge the flame, put some distance between them. It was natural to be cautious of the unknown, especially if it exuded such a terrifying aura. If I can't attack, then I'll put you in the same boat. Vladimir said with the wall of flame still in front of him, no matter how fast you are, you can't attack me with this flame in the way, can you? Immediately after, a flower-shaped flame blossomed around his body. However, despite its shape, it exuded a monstrous ryatsu from within. Now, the whole barrier was suddenly enveloped in a layer of light. However, right before he could unleash his move. Baikud number 61, Rikujkur. Muyang pointed his index finger, and 6 thin, wide beams of light were slammed into Vladimir's midsection, holding him in place despite the flower-shaped flame that protected Vladimir. Vladimir himself felt that he couldn't exert his ryatsu and his movements were restricted. Vladimir thought that a Baikud of this level shouldn't be a hindrance for him. However, Baikud number 63. Saj Sabaku. Right when Vladimir was about to break free from the Rikujkur, yellow energy, taking the form of a very thick rope, suddenly descended from the sky and bound him again, and this one was even stronger than the last. Walls of iron sand, a priestly pagoda, glowing ironclad fireflies. Standing upright, silent to the end. Baikud number 75, Goktekken. Without giving a time for Vladimir to catch a breath, Muyang used another Baikud. 5 huge iron pillars fell from the sky, and Vladimir, who could not move because of the previous Baikud, was pinned to the ground. The condescending look on his face was long gone now. Damn, he actually pinned me down, unforgivable. The arrogant Vladimir was now lying on the ground powerlessly. He never felt so humiliated before and it made him go crazy. A violent Ryoryoku burst out from Vladimir. He didn't feel anything aside from rage right now as he wanted to tear apart the Shinigami that humiliated him like this. No way, he still has this much Ryoryoku left in him. Muyang was surprised as it turned out Vladimir was still hiding that much Ryoryoku even after what he did. Although he was indeed surprised, he didn't just sit idly as Vladimir struggled to stand up. He had already prepared his follow-up moves. Seeping crest of turbidity. Arrogant vessel of lunacy. Boil forth and deny. Grow numb and flicker. Disrupt sleep. Crawling queen of iron. Eternally self-destructing doll of mud. Unite. Repulse. Fill with soil and know your own powerlessness. Had number 90, Kurohitsuji. A black cube that exuded such a mind-blowing power as if it distorted the space itself was erected around Vladimir, and he could feel its menacing power as it surrounded him. As expected of Kurohitsuji. The power is on a whole another level. Even though he was the one who used it, he couldn't blame if this had for being Aizen's favorite. Kagami Sorogoku. Although Muyang knew for sure that Kurohitsuji landed on Vladimir, he still couldn't shake off the bad feeling he got in his heart, so he used his original Kido. After trapping Vladimir, Muyang immediately used Shuanpa, took Haribel with him, and left that place. Why are you running away, Kimura-sama? Even though she was nowhere near Muyang or Vladimir's level, she realized that Muyang still had the upper hand just from observing their fight earlier, even though Vladimir's ability indeed proved to be troublesome. Yet, despite that, Muyang chose to run away. Muyang glanced down at Haribel and said nothing. "Sorry, I didn't mean to offend you." Haribel was flustered as she was afraid her words would offend Muyang. Muyang himself was a little bit confused when he saw the look on Haribel's face, wondering why she looked so flustered. "Is that what you're worried about?" Muyang said with a smirk on his face. "You know how girls always have those days in a month where they don't feel so good." "What are you talking about?" Haribel looked at Muyang with curious eyes. Muyang was silent for a moment. Did that mean a female hollow's body didn't work the same as humans' female? From the look on Haribel's eyes, it was safe to say Muyang's suspicion was right. Never mind. Since Haribel didn't get Muyang's joke, he had no choice but to brush off his lame joke with an explanation. "Well, to put it shortly, I'm not sure I can defeat him in my current state, so I just restrain him." Boom! A terrifying Ryatsu suddenly burst out, startling Muyang. He knew whose Ryatsu it was without even looking back. Although he was well aware that he constructed the kid that trapped Vladimir in a hurry, he did not expect Vladimir to break free from that kid in such a short time. At that moment, Muyang realized that Vladimir hadn't gone all out yet. Muyang didn't expect this character that wasn't even mentioned in the manga to be so powerful. If he insisted on fighting him while suppressing the hollowification process inside him, who knew what would happen? Muyang reinforced his leg with more lightning, allowing him to escape with extraordinary speed. Unforgivable. Bang! As a powerful Ryatsu burst forth, the black coffin was shattered, revealing Vladimir's figure inside that was completely covered by his wings. As Vladimir flicked his wings, it was clear that he barely took any damage. In fact, he suffered more severe injury when Muyang slashed him with his Zanpakuto earlier compared to when Muyang used Kurohitsuji. That was close. Vladimir himself knew that attack just now was really dangerous, so he immediately wrapped himself with his wings. However, he felt something off when he flicked his wings, so he looked back only to find his wings covered in bruises and minor wounds. It was only some minor injuries, but Vladimir himself was more shocked than anyone. Vladimir's wings were the toughest part of his body, and his prized wings were now covered in bruises and scars, which made him question just how powerful Muyang actually was. "Muyang, is it? I'll be sure to remember your name." Menacing Ryatsu swirled in the air as Vladimir stared at the bruise on his wings. Obviously, a proud hollow like him couldn't allow himself to fall short against the likes of Shinigami. Vladimir then used Sonido, planning to catch up with Muyang, but he felt something was amiss as he went through the crystal clear wall in front of him. Complete to his surprise, he was still at the same place as earlier, but he emerged from the wall behind him. Humph! Vladimir grunted, and a flame ball was fired from his hand. However, it disappeared the moment it hit the crystal clear wall as if it went into another dimension. However, Vladimir's pupils dilated at the next moment as the flame ball that he fired earlier almost hit him from another side hadn't he dodged it. That pesky Shinigami. He even left this annoying trickery behind. Vladimir's Ryatsu suddenly skyrocketed, and he emitted a wave of flame that shattered the kid Muyang created in a hurry. That Shinigami dares to make a fool out of me. I'm gonna finish him for sure next time. Vladimir's menacing Ryatsu swirled in the air, blowing everything away. This should be far enough. After Muyang was convinced that he had put enough distance between them and Vladimir, he put down Haribel. Okay, you're free to go now. Although he ended up saving Haribel on his way to find Stark, the Haribel he saw now and the third Espada Haribel that he knew was way too different, and it was honestly disappointing. Kimura-sama. Haribel seemed like she had something to say, but she was kind of reluctant to do so. What's the matter? Seeing Haribel seemed fidgety, Muyang immediately inquired her. Although the Haribel in front of him was quite different from the Haribel that he knew, Muyang had a soft spot for all Bleach's original character. "They'll serve you, but can you please protect us in exchange? If someone as strong as you is on our side, we'll be able to rest easy." Harabel knelt down on the ground suddenly, bowing her head. "Serve me?" Muyang was shocked for a moment, but he suddenly thought of something. "Wait, us? Who else is there other than you? There are 3 more female hollow aside from Main. Us female hollows fall short when it comes to power. Because of that, we're constantly being targeted by other hollows, but if Kimura-sama is there to protect us we should be safe." Harabel suddenly got worked up for a moment before lowering her tone again. "I'm well aware that this is such a selfish request, but..." Looking at the hopeful look in Harabel's eyes, Muyang couldn't just refuse immediately. Besides, she said that there were 3 other, so it should be Mila Rose, Sung-sun, and Apache. Although he was kind of disappointed with Harabel, those 3 were original Bleach characters too, and he had a soft spot for them. "Lead the way," Muyang said after a brief silence. "Seriously?" Harabel was thrilled as Muyang agreed to her request. Although Harabel alone was sufficient to get them through various predicaments, they would be safer if Muyang agreed to protect them. Judging from the brief battle earlier, she believed that even Baragan was no match against Muyang. Harabel immediately led Muyang towards her hideout, grinning all the way. Along the way, Muyang was looking closely at Harabel as he followed closely behind her and felt that her demeanor as the later third espada was still there. "Kimura-sama, we're almost there." As Harabel notified Muyang that her hideout was close, their eyes met, and she felt an indescribable feeling in her heart. Meanwhile, Muyang was a little bit flustered as he has been staring at Harabel for quite some time. Suddenly Muyang's complexion changed. "What's the matter, Kimura-sama? Is your hideout over there?" Harabel nodded after following the direction Muyang pointed. "This is not good. I felt a few powerful Ryatsu from there, and some of them are even stronger than you. I think your companion may be in trouble. Inside a cave in Hueco Mundo. Why Harabel-sama has not returned yet?" A lion-like hollow said while licking her paws. "As if the likes of you could understand what Harabel-sama is thinking." A deer-like hollow didn't waste any time to make fun of what the lion-like hollow said. "Ha!" The lion-like hollow immediately glared at the deer-like hollow in response. "Don't get ahead of yourself, Apache. You're nothing but a newbie until recently. Don't get on my nerves if you don't want me to kill you. What are you blabbering about? You're the one who gets ahead of yourself, Mila Rose, you stupid lion." "What? Ha!" They both were on each other's throat as they rammed their heads against each other's. "What are you both fighting for? You both are equally stupid anyway." A snake-like hollow condescendingly said as she looked down the lion-like and the deer-like hollow due to her tall body. "You wanna go, Sung-sun?" Mila Rose and Apache, who were fighting until a moment ago, immediately said at the same time as they glared at Sung-sun. "Humph." Realizing both of them were so in sync just now, both Mila Rose and Apache grunted and turned their heads away from each other. "Look at how well you two get along. You two are so in sync just now." Sung-sun didn't waste this opportunity to make fun of Mila Rose and Apache again. "Sung-sun, you bastard." However, while these 3 were busy bickering, bang! A sudden Ryatsu outburst startled them. "What?" They instantly stopped bickering and looked toward the entrance. They could feel a terrifying Ryatsu that was even stronger than Harabel. They were familiar with it, so they knew it belonged to none other than Baragan. "What's the matter? Are you guys too scared to come out after sensing Baragan-sama's Ryatsu? Bastard!" Sung-sun, Mila Rose, and Apache looked at each other before walking out of the cave. Harabel was not with them now, and they definitely didn't stand a chance against Baragan on their own, but at the very least, they didn't want to tarnish Harabel's name. "Baragan, are you such a coward that you have to swarm our hideout while Harabel-sama is away?" Mila Rose asked curtly as soon as she arrived at the entrance and saw Barragan sitting on his throne made of bones surrounded by a horde of Minos Grande. Despite her tone, her legs were slightly trembling. It couldn't be helped as she was in the presence of the king of Hueco Mundo, especially now that Hariel was not with them. "You're being disrespectful to Barragan-sama." A hollow that was kneeling behind Barragan just now stood up and yelled at Mila Rose for her rude remarks. Sung-sun, Mila Rose, and Apache were all surprised. Although it was just another small fry that served Barragan, they couldn't underestimate him as there were so many of them here. "Stand down, acrylic," Barragan suddenly said when he saw one of his men was about to attack Mila Rose, Sung-sun, and Apache while tapping his finger on his throne. "Barragan-sama?" The hollow looked back towards Barragan as he was confused why Barragan stopped him. "Huh." The tapping sound that Barragan made when he tapped his fingers on his throne suddenly stopped, and he shifted his gaze to the hollow that looked at him with a questioning look on his face. The hollow immediately knelt down on the ground and said flusteredly, "Please forgive me, Your Majesty." "Oh. You're asking for my forgiveness? Then you should know what your mistake is, right? Enlighten me." "I doubt Your Majesty's order for even a second, and for that, I deserve to die 1,000 times. The hollow bowed down with his forehead on the ground, and his whole body was trembling. "You already know your mistake deserves death, so why beg me for mercy?" Knowing that he could die at any second now, the hollow was even more panic. "Since you're a newbie and there are a lot of things you didn't know yet, I'll let it slide after you cut one of your arms." Hearing Barragan's words, the hollow lopped off one of his arms without the slightest hesitation before walking back where he previously knelt respectfully, without even looking back at his torn-off arm. Sung-sun, Mila Rose, and Apache that witnessed everything with their own eyes, gasped. This was their first time seeing Barragan this close, and even though the one that was punished was Barragan's henchman and not them, they could clearly feel the pressure from Barragan, and one thing for sure, it was way stronger than Haribel. Barragan leaned back on his throne as he shifted his gaze towards Sung-sun, Mila Rose, Apache standing below, and the tapping sound on his throne echoed throughout the surroundings again. Tap, tap, tap. Each time Barragan tapped on his throne lightly, Sung-sun, Mila Rose, and Apache could feel that their heart was about to come out. "You three, since Haribel is not here, I am not interested in ants like you, but you must know that my authority as the king of Hueco Mundo is absolute. On that note, I'll let you guys walk away with just cut off your arm like acrylic did." Barragan said nonchalantly while still tapping his throne, which made the three of them shocked. "What's the matter? Do you have any objections?" Barragan looked down at the three weak hollows on the ground as if they were ants. In fact, he ordered them all to do that simply out of whim. In his eyes, these three were not worth his time. "Who do you think you are, Barragan?" Mila Rose mustered her courage and objected, "No one can order us around except Haribel-sama." "Oh ho!" Barragan was intrigued that the ant in front of him dared to defy the king of Hueco Mundo even without Haribel there with them. He could have squashed these ants with his hand if he wanted to. As Barragan leaned closer toward them, they instinctively felt fear. Even if they mustered their courage, they just couldn't deny the fact that Barragan was a far stronger Minos Grande. "Oh, are you trembling?" Barragan suddenly said, "Well, it can't be helped. You guys are in the presence of the king of Hueco Mundo, after all. Barragan-sama. Allow me to execute these three in your stead." A tiger-like hollow suddenly appeared beside Barragan. "Ah, it's you, Gio. I'm delighted that you're so considerate. If you insist, I'll leave them to you then. I already lost interest in these ants, but I do look forward to seeing the look on Haribel's face when she saw they died." After receiving Barragan's permission, Gio felt a sudden excitement as he could be useful for Barragan. "You three will have to die for your insolence toward Barragan-sama." Gio rushed toward Sung-sun, Mila Rose, and Apache, suddenly disappearing from plain sight. Realizing Gio was on the hunt for their heads, they three couldn't shake off the uneasiness in their heart, especially when they realized Gio was much faster than them. Baragon was watching them closely. Seeing the futile struggle of the wheel always sparked his interest. After all, life in Hueco Mundo was too dull and boring for someone of his caliber. However, to Baragon's surprise, Gio was sent flying to his feet as fast as he rushed toward Sung Sun, Mila Rose, and Apache. Baragon-sama. Gio turned toward Baragon before vomiting a mouthful of blood and fainted. Harabel-sama. Meanwhile, Sung Sun, Mila Rose, and Apache cried in joy as a golden yellow-haired figure appeared before them. After glancing at Gio that was lying beside his feet, Baragon turned his eyes to the two silhouettes that showed up unannounced, Harabel. Harabel also looked towards Baragon with cold eyes after glancing at Sung Sun, Mila Rose, and Apache. Ah, Baragon, huh? While they were staring at each other, Muyang suddenly called Baragon's name nonchalantly, which obviously surprised Sung Sun, Mila Rose, and Apache. Since this man came with Harabel, they knew that he must be her acquaintance, but even if they got Harabel on their side, Baragon's men wouldn't just let it slide when a random man disrespected their king. Damn, that guy doesn't know his place. Unforgivable, he dares to disrespect Baragon-sama. Kill him. Muyang frowned when he heard Baragon's men began threatening him, but they suddenly stopped when Baragon raised his hand. Once his men went quiet, he turned his attention to the man that just called his name. At first, he thought the man was just someone that Harabel happened to stumble upon. However, when this man addressed him so casually, his interest was piqued. When Baragon observed Muyang from top to bottom, he noticed he had no mask nor the hole that Hollow usually had. In addition, he wore black clothes, and Baragon couldn't feel any Hollow Ryatsu from him. Are you human or Shinigami? Shinigami. Muyang briefly said as he stroked his Zanpakuto's hilt. Shinigami, huh? Muyang's answer clearly didn't surprise Baragon that was still sitting on his throne. Is there something you want to say to King of Hueco Mundo? Nah, it's just that telling them to cut off their hand is a bit much, don't you think? Muyang indifferently said, followed by a chuckle. Sung Sun, Mila Rose, and Apache were startled as they didn't expect Muyang would voice how unreasonable Baragon was. I don't see anything wrong with it. Are you telling me you think otherwise, Shinigami? Baragon said with a taunting tone as he looked down towards Muyang. Although Muyang knew how strong Baragon was, he still felt pressure from this king of Hueco Mundo. Muyang then pointed to Sung Sun, Mila Rose, and Apache behind him. I mean, just look at them. Well, setting the other two aside, that one doesn't even have a limb. Muyang pointed at Sung Sun this time and added, don't you see? She's a snake-like hollow. Aren't you just making things difficult by telling her to cut off her own arm? Everyone was speechless when they heard what Muyang said. The atmosphere was so tense, and they wondered what Muyang was about to say, yet he said something completely unpredictable. You bastard. Mila Rose was the first one to break the silence. She immediately burst into a rage as she thought Muyang had made fun of her. Hey, Mila Rose. Apache immediately dragged Mila Rose away before pointing at Sung Sun and whispered something to Mila Rose with a smirk. HM. The look on Mila Rose's face suddenly changed. Although she didn't like what the Shinigami in front of them said, Sung Sun had it the worst here. Realizing this fact, Mila Rose turned her eyes at Sung Sun and almost burst into laughter when she noticed the look on Sung Sun's face. Sung Sun was clearly furious simply from looking her eyes. Is that all you want to say, Shinigami? Baragon didn't seem to understand Muyang's joke, and after seeing Baragon's reaction, Muyang began to think that the king of Hueco Mundo might have a slightly different taste of humor. If that's all, I don't think you have anything left to surprise me. You're just a mere Shinigami, after all. Baragon waved his hand in disappointment. Muyang's eyes widened. What was going on today? Anywhere he went, he was always welcomed by the Emir Shinigami remarks. Which one of you wants to take care of this Shinigami for me? Some of his men stood up almost instantly while glaring at Muyang. Harabel-sama. Mila Rose couldn't help but raise her voice. Although she couldn't stand this Shinigami's attitude, he should be on their side, considering he came with Harabel. Therefore, was it okay to just watch as he was killed by Barragan's men? It's okay, Harabel said without a trace of worry in her eyes. At Muyang's level right now, let alone his men, even Barragan himself was no match against Muyang. But even so, Mila Rose was still worried. Witness Kimura-sama's strength with your own eyes. Harabel said without looking back. Seeing Muyang's battle up close should help them hone their strength. Kimura-sama. Meanwhile, Sung-sun, Mila Rose, and Apache were more concerned with how Harabel addressed Muyang. Sung-sun, Mila Rose, and Apache looked at each other. They were clearly in shock and wondered just who this Shinigami was. While Sung-sun, Mila Rose, and Apache were still shocked by how Harabel addressed Muyang, some of Barragan's men had already charged at Muyang to prove themselves to Barragan, especially since they didn't feel anything special from Muyang's Ryatsu. Geez, everyone just looks down on Shinigami nowadays. He didn't think much of it when Vladimir looked down on him earlier, but it was starting to get on Muyang's nerve now. These guys are so eager to die, I see. Muyang drew his Zanpakuto in an instant, and it was as if Barragan's men charging toward him could see a crescent-shaped light, but only for a moment as they already fell to the ground before they knew it. These Ajuchas immediately turned into Raisher in a matter of seconds. Amazing! Sung-sun, Mila Rose, and Apache were speechless when they saw those hollows die almost instantly. After all, they were fellow Ajuchas, just like them. This made them see Muyang in a different light, and now they understood why Harabel addressed him with Sama. Interesting. I didn't expect a mere Shinigami like you to be quite capable. Instead of bursting into a rage when he saw his men were killed by Muyang almost instantly, Barragan seemed excited. However, if that's all you got. Barragan instantly disappeared from his throne and reappeared right beside Muyang, with a giant black axe raised high in his hand, ready to strike Muyang's head. Drop dead, Shinigami. Muyang chuckled before raising his Zanpakuto over his head to parry Barragan's attack. Dang! Muyang didn't seem shocked or flustered whatsoever. The speed is so-so, I guess, but it lacks in power. Muyang glanced up at Barragan, who attacked him from the top and even commented on his attack. You! Before Barragan could say anything back, he felt something powerful hitting him on the abdomen, and before he could react, he was sent flying. Muyang put his foot back to the ground and said indifferently, well, that's all you got after all. Hearing Muyang's ridicule, a trace of anger flashed in Barragan's eyes. He was still in the air, but he twisted his body and borrowed the momentum of his feet in the air. He immediately stopped the momentum of retreating. Then he suddenly kicked and rushed towards Muyang at an even faster speed. The giant axe in his hand flashed with a trace of cold light. Muyang slipped his feet and leaned to the side. Barragan's axe chopped down on his body, but it did not hurt Muyang in the slightest. What? Seeing his axe cut down from Muyang's side by a hair's breadth but did not hurt Muyang in the slightest, Barragan's eyes flashed with surprise. The attack did not hit, but as Barragan's body leaned forward, he saw a hand suddenly put in front of his eyes. Had number 33, Sukatsui. A blue light suddenly erupted from the hand in front of him. Shit! Barragan was shocked, but it was too late to avoid it at this time. He turned the giant axe in his hand, and Barragan put it in front of him to block the attack. Boom! Barragan retreated a distance under the bombardment of Muyang's Kido, but under the protection of the giant axe in his hand, he was not hurt but was forced away by the impact. Damn! Being blocked by the smoke from the attack, Barragan used the Sonido to retreat. He could not help but let out a dissatisfied cry. He originally thought that he was just a weak guy, but he did not expect that he would suffer a few losses. This made him, the king of Hueco Mundo, furious. Putting down the axe in his hand, Barragan did not have time to make the next move. He saw a bright knife light flashing in front of him. Without thinking much, Barragan raised the giant axe in his hand to meet the knife light in front of him. Rumble. Barragan only felt a strong force coming from his axe. Because he was in the air and didn't have enough strength to hold his ground, his body was pushed to the ground by force. With a wave of his hand, a saber light slashed down and Barragan fell from the sky. Muyang's body swayed, and he appeared on the ground again. He looked up to the falling figure. And the figure who was falling from the sky. It was Barragan, who he had hit. Full moon slash. With a twist of his wrist, a wisp of cyan light flashed on Muyang's Zanpakuto. With a wave of his arm, the surrounding crowd felt as if they had seen a full moon in an instant. The light that erupted from it even instantly covered up the moonlight emitted by the moon in the sky above the void ring. After being struck down from the sky by Muyang, Barragan only heard the sound of the wind. The power that came from that attack just now was unexpectedly great. Now that he was struck down from the sky like this, he actually had no ability to resist at all. He could only powerlessly fall from the sky like this. Whoosh! Seeing that Muyang, who was originally standing in the air, had already disappeared from where he was, Barragan suddenly felt a sense of crisis. Sure enough, the moment Muyang disappeared from the sky, Barragan suddenly felt a powerful Ryu-Ryoku fluctuation from behind him. Barragan struggled to turn his body. He looked down at Muyang who was standing on the ground. He only saw that Muyang's Zanpakuto was covered with a layer of green light. Then, with a light cry from Muyang, he turned his wrist. The sword light from his Zanpakuto flew out of his body and flew towards him. At the same time, a terrifying aura rushed towards him. A full moon suddenly flashed in the air. It made everyone that saw Muyang's move to be in awe. The beautiful sword light made them sigh in their hearts. Even Barragan's subordinates were amazed when they saw the saber light. Even if they were enemies, they could not help but be amazed by this move. After casually putting the saber in his hand back into its sheath, Muyang's body flashed and appeared in front of Harabel. Kimura-sama. Seeing Muyang appear in front of him, Harabel bowed respectfully. Then, he turned his eyes to the three people behind him. He looked at them and said to Muyang, "These are the three companions I mentioned to you." "Yes." Muyang looked at the three people in front of him and nodded. He couldn't help but feel a little disappointed in his heart. He had thought that they were all human figures in his impression. He didn't expect that he would see the shape of a beast now. A lion, a deer, and a snake. It was really far from the three people he remembered. However, it was no wonder. After all, the current Harabel was just like this. As Harabel's subordinate officials, what could the three of them do? Moreover, Aizen had not yet begun his Arrancar experiment in Hueco Mundo. They were only at the level of Jillian. It was still a long way until they grow into a human form. Not to mention the autonomy of Arrancar, it was even longer. Kimura-sama. Seeing Muyang looking at the three of them, Sung-sun, Mila Rose, and Apache all spoke with some fear. After all, Harabel, who was powerful in their hearts, also called Kimura in a well-behaved manner. And this guy, Kimura, could even take down Barragan in a one-sided manner. Muyang nodded casually. He did not care much about the three people in front of him. After all, their appearances were a bit different from what he had imagined. Moreover, their strength was too weak in his eyes. There was really nothing worth paying attention to. Just as Sung-sun and the other two were feeling uneasy because of Muyang's cold performance. Boom! Unforgivable! Unforgivable! You actually dared to hurt the king of Hueco Mundo, His Majesty Barragan, unforgivable. With a roar of dissatisfaction, a purple-black Ryu-Ryoku suddenly burst out from the air behind Muyang. A figure wrapped in purple-black Ryu-Ryoku appeared from the air behind Muyang. Muyang turned to look at Barragan who had unleashed his power. After the attack just now, he could still raise his will to fight. As expected of the king of Hueco Mundo, his will was very firm. He's not dead yet. Seeing Baragon, who was emitting a powerful aura from Ryuryoku, Apache could not help but speak. Her tone was a little trembling. Just now, Muyang's attack had already shocked them. They did not expect that Baragon, who had suffered that attack, could still fight again. Was this the true strength of the king of Hueco Mundo? Well, I did go easy on him. Muyang couldn't help but laugh when he heard Apache's words. Although the attack just now was very powerful, it was still unrealistic to get rid of Baragon just like that. After all, he was also the king of Hueco Mundo. Muyang would be surprised if he was dealt with like this. Sure enough, these three people were too naive. Unforgivable. Enough, is that the only sentence you're able to say after getting your arse kicked? Muyang couldn't help but complain when he heard Baragon's roar in the air. The great Hueco Mundo emperor was actually repeating those words over and over again. There was no new meaning at all, how original. Shinigami. You're dead. Baragon raised the giant axe in his hand, and purple-black Ryuryoku rotated around his body, giving off a faint feeling of oppression. Is that so? A disdainful smile appeared on the corner of Muyang's mouth as he pointed at Baragon's face with his finger. Had number 63, fiery lightning howl, rake. A huge lightning cannon suddenly shot out from the palm of Muyang's hand, and its momentum was even greater than the previous slash. Muyang's attainments in Kido were not weak. At this time, he was more familiar with Thunder attribute Kido, so although the Kido sent out was only number 63 had, its power was not inferior to the number 80 had sent by ordinary people. Before Baragon, who was shouting in the air, could react, Muyang's attack had come, and the powerful had instantly drowned his voice and body. So powerful. Seeing the hat casually made by Muyang, the three people standing behind him were stunned. The power of the casual attack was much stronger than the full power of the void flash of their own people. Lord Baragon. Although Muyang and Baragon had fought several times, their speed was extremely fast, and those fights were only completed in a short time. It was not until Muyang once again sent out such a Kido attack on Baragon that the hollow subordinates of Baragon reacted. Looking at Baragon, who was once again drowned by Muyang's attack, one by one, they suddenly cried out in worry. It is this Shinigami. Kill him. And Haribel worked together with the Shinigami, a traitor. Baragon's subordinates only clamored to look at Muyang's side, but no one rushed up. What a joke, even their king, Baragon, did not have the strength to fight back in the hands of this Shinigami. His own people rushed up to their inevitable death. Seeing the eyes of the surrounding people only looking at his side, Muyang smiled freely. Sure enough, no one was stupid. In the face of this situation, even if one was full of anger, no one dared to rush up. However, if he really killed Baragon here, there would be no available strength to use in the future. After all, he was the Segunda, second, Espada, and Haribel is the Trace, third, who had been turned to his side. He did not know what Aizen would do in the future. With a slight smile, Muyang could not help but look forward to it in his heart. He really did not know what kind of composition Aizen's 10 Espada would be in the future. Alright, let's go. Muyang casually put away his Zanpakuto and no longer looked back at Baragon on the ground. He only nodded at Haribel and the others before taking the lead and leaving. You want come with me? Hearing Muyang's words, Mila Rose was slightly startled. What else? What else do you plan to do? But Baragon. Mila Rose. Yes, Lord Haribel. Mila Rose respectfully looked at Haribel as she walked toward her. Let's go. Okay. Although there were still some doubts in her heart, she still obediently closed her mouth and followed behind Muyang. Sung Sun and Apache did not speak and quietly followed behind Muyang. Seeing the group of 5 people walking over, Baragon's subordinates all fearfully opened up a path. Although they were filled with resentment towards this Shinigami who dared to offend Baragan, they were not brave enough to challenge the person who easily defeated their king. Seeing these proud virtual figures obediently opening up a path for them, the three of them felt a bit complicated. They never thought that those high and mighty people would be like this now. Although this was only because they borrowed Muyang's prestige, at this moment, the sense of superiority that they felt was evident. Only when Muyang left with Haribel and the others did Baragan, who had been submerged by the smoke caused by the attacks of the Kido, reveal his figure from the smoke. Lord Baragan. When they saw Baragan, many of their subordinates immediately went up to him. Baragan's subordinate bowed on the ground with a respectful expression. Although Baragan did not have much strength to resist Shinigami's subordinates, he was still far from being able to catch up with them. At least here, he was still the king of Hueco Mundo. Damn it, Shinigami. Baragan looked at the group of hollow kneeling on the ground. He no longer felt the pride and self-satisfaction he had in the past. The strength he was proud of was actually not worth mentioning in front of that Shinigami, and these so-called subordinates were useless in this situation. Strength. At this moment, a thirst for power suddenly arose in Baragan's heart. Ever since he grew up to the Vastolord, and since he became the king of Hueco Mundo, Baragan had never been so eager for power. Originally, he was the strongest king of Hueco Mundo, but now, when he found that his power was no longer so powerful in front of others, Baragan's heart once again aroused the desire for power. That desire was even deeper than when he was eager to grow to the Vastolord level. Shinigami, next time we meet, I will kill you. Previously, when he felt that Muyang had left, Baragan did not rush out to fight with Muyang again. Instead, he chose to hide in the air in humiliation and let Muyang leave. This kind of humiliating behavior was unforgivable to the king of Hueco Mundo. At the same time, he was extremely eager for power. Baragan also secretly vowed in his heart that the next time they met, he would kill that Shinigami to wash away the humiliation he suffered during this fight. In the endless sand and dust, Muyang slowly walked with the four of them. Where are we going? Behind Muyang, Mila Rose couldn't help but whisper. After leaving Baragan, the three of them followed closely behind Muyang and Haribel, walking aimlessly in the desert for who knows how long. Humph, Mila Rose, you stupid lion, you still want to know what Lord Kimura and Lord Haribel are thinking? What did you say, AP? Be careful. I'll kill you. Oh. You really know how to talk big. I wonder who will kill who. You stupid lion. Damn it, you bastard. Aya, you two should stop arguing. I've already gotten used to your clearly weak remarks. What did you say? Sun. Your three companions are really interesting. I am ashamed, Kimura-sama. You shouldn't. Muyang turned to look at Haribel, who was walking beside him. All this time, she looked respectful. In fact, I still feel that it is better to maintain the feeling of equality between friends. Haribel lowered his head slightly and remained silent. By the way, Haribel, do you have anywhere to go? Ah. Haribel raised his head and looked at Muyang in surprise. He saw that Muyang was heading straight in a direction. He thought that Muyang had his own plans. Why? I'm not hollow. I'm not familiar with Hueco Mundo at all. Of course, I don't know where to go. Muyang saw the expression on Haribel's face and explained, as for you, don't you have any other bases? No, we have always been in that place. Haribel shook his head. Alright then, let's just find a random place. Muyang casually looked around and then looked at a slightly taller mountain in the distance. Let's go there and take a look. Looking at the direction Muyang pointed at, Haribel nodded and silently followed behind Muyang. A few days later, Muyang sat cross-legged on the top of a mountain peak. His Zanpakuto was resting on his knees. Not far from him, Haribel was leaning against a stone. His eyes were closed, but his mind was on guard as he paid attention to the movements around him. Inner world. Muyang and Kaze no Sora sat facing each other. How do you feel about the new power? Kaze no Sora waved the paper fan in his hand, still looking calm and confident. Powerful, Muyang recalled the ability he had displayed in the Skyaku Hill and spat out these two words. He. Kaze no Sora laughed softly. He had absolute confidence in his own abilities. When you first released Zanpakuto, your Ryuryoku was still too weak. You weren't strong enough to use Shirkai, and your Zanpakuto could only use half of his Shirkai, so the power you can control is only a little bit of lightning power derived from your Zanpakuto. However, Kaze no Sora is essentially a wind-type Zanpakuto. The lightning ability is only derived from extremely powerful wind-type power, and this derived thunder-type ability can only play an auxiliary role. It can't take any damage. But after your Ryuryoku reaches the standard, you can fully display Zanpakuto's real ability, the strongest wind element Zanpakuto. Soul Society's strongest wind element Zanpakuto not only has the wind element ability, but also the thunder and lightning ability derived from Zanpakuto's wind element ability. With the derived thunder ability, whether it is the strength of the body, speed, explosive power, reaction, these will all be greatly improved, and the wind ability also makes your Zanpakuto have strong destructive power, whether in close combat or long-range attack. As for Bankai, it does not bring you any other ability, just let the wind ability further strengthen. I think you must be very disappointed at that time. Muyang smiled faintly. At that time, his heart was indeed a little disappointed. The long-awaited Bankai actually did not bring him any additional surprise ability, but... Indeed, I did not think of it. I thought that Bankai was really just a more powerful wind and thunder force. It is indeed just a more powerful wind and thunder force. Otherwise, what do you think? Do you think that the power to touch space now is Zanpakuto's new ability? You are wrong. In the end, this is only Zanpakuto's original power, the wind ability. In fact, there was no strict distinction of superiority or inferiority in Zanpakuto. Each of Zanpakuto's abilities was unique. After all, Zanpakuto was born from Shinigami's soul. It was as if there was no same person, nor was there the same Zanpakuto. Each of Zanpakuto's abilities was unique. It was just to see how many people could develop their own Zanpakuto's ability. How is this possible? How can there be no difference between Zanpakuto and himself? Muyang couldn't help but retort, just like old masters Ryujin Jaka, isn't he still known as the strongest flame-type Zanpakuto? And didn't you also say that you are the strongest wind-type, Zanpakuto? You can also say that Kaze no Sora waved his hand, don't care about such a small matter. This is not a small matter. Muyang turned his head and whispered. But how much strength can Shinigami's Zanpakuto play? In the end, it still depends on how far Shinigami developed his own Zanpakuto. Just like Yamamoto Genryosai, he can develop Zanpakuto to that extent, but if it is another person, even with the strongest fire element, Zanpakuto may not be able to push the Zanpakuto in his hand to that extent. And what you have to do now is to continue to develop Zanpakuto's ability. Kaze no Sora himself is an extremely powerful Zanpakuto, with infinite possibilities waiting for you to develop. What? Developing Zanpakuto? After hearing Kaze no Sora's words, Muyang no longer bothered about what he had said about Zanpakuto. He wasn't paying attention to that sort of thing. Yes. What do you think the power you just grasped should be? Kaze no Sora suddenly asked, looking at Muyang. The power that I just mastered. Muyang was stunned. Then, he said with a bit of embarrassment, don't say that. Actually, I'm just a guy who can only use brute force, not a master. Seeing the shy and reserved look on Muyang's face, Skywind silently turned his head, not looking at his pretentious appearance. Seeing Kaze no Sora's reaction, Muyang put away his joking manner. The expression on his face was slightly solemn. That ability is obviously the ability of space. It is indeed the ability of space. Kaze no Sora nodded and affirmed Muyang's words. Then his voice changed, Shinigami's Zanpakuto. Generally speaking, the ability of Bankai is a further improvement of Shirkai. You should know this. Soifan's 2 hits kill Suzumabachi is further strengthened with her Bankai, Jakuho Reikaben. In a sense, her 2-hit Shirkai now becomes 1 hit after her Bankai. Ikimara Jin's Shins and Kamishini no Yari, Senbenzakura and Senbenzakura Kageyoshi, everyone's Bankai is, without exception, an upgrade of Shirkai ability, or a supplement to Shirkai ability. So, what do you think the ability of space has to do with your previous wind ability or thunder ability? Its connection. Hearing Skywind's question, Muyang was slightly stunned. Then he began to think about it. It was true that his space ability did not have much to do with the power of his Shirkai, which were wind and thunder elements. But the ability of Bankai should indeed have something to do with Shirkai. Just like before, after Bankai, the ability of wind and thunder was strengthened. Suddenly Muyang's heart moved, his eyebrows raised, and his eyes showed a trace of enlightenment. Could it be? It seems that you realized. Seeing Muyang's demeanor, Kaze no Sora said with a smile. He appeared with a bit of joy, apparently satisfied with Muyang's performance. Then the new ability to control space was only because the power of the wind and thunder element was extremely strong. That's why you can break through space. Muyang said with a bit of speculation. Smart, completely correct. Kaze no Sora nodded, facing Muyang with a somewhat expectant expression. He said, what do you think wind power is? Is it just an attack method? The wind ability is not only a long-range attack method. The wind represents sharpness. It represents destructive power and speed. And the thunder power derived from your wind ability represents powerful penetration and destructive power. After Bankai, your Zanpakuto has more powerful wind and thunder power, and the powerful power that these 2 powers can achieve is to make you finally powerful enough to break through space, so you have the current space ability. Hearing his own guess was confirmed by Kaze no Sora, Muyang's heart could not help but have a trace of fluctuation. He did not expect that the power brought by the wind and thunder abilities could reach the point of breaking the space. Suddenly, a glimmer of light flashed in Muyang's heart. When strength reached the extreme, it was enough to break through space. And the 2 abilities of wind and thunder could not only achieve strength. In addition to strength, there was also the factor of speed. When strength reached the extreme, it could break through space and grasp the ability of space. Then what if speed reached the extreme? Was it time? Thinking that his ability could even touch the ability of time after it was developed to the extreme, Muyang's heart could not help but beat faster. The ultimate technique, that was the ability of time. Raising his head, he looked at Kaze no Sora, who was sitting opposite him, with questioning and somewhat excited gaze. Muyang was a bit nervous. In Muyang's nervous eyes, Kaze no Sora nodded slightly. Seeing Kaze no Sora nod, Muyang's heart was filled with a burst of ecstasy. But don't get too excited. The ability of time and space is a forbidden area, after all. Even if you can really develop Zanpakuto's ability, you can only touch the power of time and space slightly. It is almost impossible to completely grasp it. That is enough. Kaze no Sora nodded slightly. The power of time was extremely powerful. Even if it was just a slight touch, the power that could be exerted was also extremely terrifying. The 2 of them looked at each other. Kaze no Sora was still calm and confident. The paper fan in his hand shook slightly as if nothing could disturb his mood. Muyang sat there, his excitement slowly calming down. The expression on his face gradually became calm, but his eyes became brighter and brighter. Now you have found your way forward. Seeing that Muyang's expression had calmed down and his eyes were shining brightly, Kaze no Sora said with a gratified expression. An. Muyang nodded. After chatting with Kaze no Sora for a while, the confusion and hesitation in his heart were swept away. His thoughts raced, and the light in Muyang's eyes grew brighter. In terms of swordsmanship, Muyang's attainments in swordsmanship reached the level where even Yamamoto Genryusai did not dare to underestimate. The level of Kido is also extremely high, and the hand-to-hand fighting, after so many years of training for his own spirit body, Muyang's physical fitness has reached a height that ordinary Shinigami can't reach, and the Shuanpa is naturally needless to say. What's more, with Yoruchi as the commander-in-chief, a friend who is extremely good at Shuanpa and hand-to-hand fighting, Muyang's level in those two aspects will not be low. The most terrible thing for a person is to lose the goal of advancing. When the strength in all aspects has reached this extremely powerful point, Muyang has almost lost the direction to move forward. Everyone is walking on the road to make themselves stronger. Aizen and Kisuke were also like this. It is because everyone is exploring how to become stronger than Aizen and Kisuke researched the magical thing like Jayaku, each person is constantly pursuing forward. Muyang is also like this, but he is not like Aizen and Kisuke. He does not have that kind of research talent. He can enhance his strength through research, so he can only start from himself to hone his skills and temper his spirit body, but these two aspects are almost at their limit. But now, after this conversation with Kaze no Sora, Muyang finally knows the direction of his continue to be strong. Developing his Zanpakuto. Zanpakuto's ability has infinite possibilities, at least this Zanpakuto Kaze no Sora of his own. With the power of wind and thunder as the foundation, the power of wind and thunder could burst out with great speed and strength. Since his strength had been strengthened to the extreme and he could touch the power of space, then as long as he developed Zanpakuto's ability, when his speed reached the extreme, he would definitely be able to touch the power of time. Moreover, Skywind had indeed confirmed his conjecture before. Thinking of this, Muyang couldn't help but smile. This was really great. It seems that you have an idea. I am only giving you a hint. And at most, you can only do this. The extent of what you can do depends on yourself. I know, but your hint is already very important. At the very least, you have shown me the direction to move forward. I already have a lot of thoughts in my mind. All kinds of wonderful thoughts are colliding in my mind. That's good. I knew that as long as you gave you a direction to move forward, you would be able to create infinite possibilities. Of course. A proud expression appeared on the corners of Muyang's mouth. However, if it is a new ability, many of the previous fighting methods can no longer be used. There is no need for that. Muyang shook his head and denied Skywind's words. The previous fighting skills are still very useful. Some moves can still be used. Oh. After all, this new ability is my trump card. There are not many people who can make me use this new ability. When Muyang said this, the expression on his face was very proud. There were not many people who could make him go all out. But if you want to grasp the profound meaning of time. Muyang turned his hand, and a sword appeared in his hand. I think fighting is the most direct way. Dang! The two Zanpakuto swords clashed in an instant. A moment ago, they were still chatting amiably. In the next moment, Muyang had already started fighting with Kaze no Sora. Fighting was still the best way to improve one's strength. This was because all sorts of inspiration could burst forth in battle. This is not enough. Kaze no Sora had a smile on his face. I think so too. Muyang smiled slightly, his body retreated a few steps, and Zanpakuto waved in his hand. Bankai, Hakaze no Kiru. Looking at the opposite side of Kaze no Sora, who also has Bankai, and then look at the same Zanpakuto in the hands of the two people. After Bankai, there was basically no change in Kaze no Sora's appearance because he was already at the Bankai form all along. I think I now know why Bankai is called Hakaze no Kiru. Muyang suddenly opened his mouth and said. Oh. Why? Skywind looked at Muyang with interest. It should be said that although the ability after Bankai is still wind, it has already broken through the limit of wind ability. Muyang played with Zanpakuto in his hand. The power of breaking through the limit of wind is necessary to reach Zanpakuto's space element, and the speed of breaking the limit of the wind is necessary to reach Zanpakuto's ultimate time element. Hey, Apache, what do you think that Kimura-sama is doing? He has been sitting on the mountain since that day, and it has been a few days. TSK, Kimura-sama's thoughts are not something a stupid lion like you can guess. The deer-shaped Apache turned to look at the golden lion rubbing against her and said with a mocking tone. What? Hearing the mocking tone from Apache, the expression on the face of Mila Rose suddenly changed. All the hair on his body stood up as she fiercely looked at Apache. You silly deer, don't be too proud. You're lucky that I don't kill you. Humph. Seeing the reaction of Mila Rose, Apache only arrogantly turned her head, looking as if he didn't care at all. You. Seeing the reaction of Apache, the veins on the forehead of Mila Rose popped out, and her eyes burned with anger. Alright, you two, stop arguing. Sung-sun came over and looked down at the two of them. Then her eyes turned to Muyang, who was sitting on the mountain peak, and Haribel, leaning against the mountain peak. Do not disturb Haribel-sama and Kimura-sama. When they heard Sung-sun reminding them of Muyang and Haribel, Apache and Mila Rose stopped. Although they did not know what Muyang was doing sitting on the mountain peak, they knew it must be a very important matter. Otherwise, Haribel would not be standing guard at the side all the time. But Kimura-sama is really powerful. Even Baragon is not a match for him. Apache looked at Muyang, who was sitting on the mountain peak, and could not help but recall the situation when Muyang easily dealt with Baragon that day. TSK, of course, Kimura-sama is very strong. We all already know about this. Mila Rose, do you have to make things difficult for me? Not at all. I just can't bear to see you like this. You are clearly just a newcomer. You. Boom. Just as the three of them were about to start a meaningless round of argument, an extremely powerful Ryoryoku erupted without warning, instantly causing the three of them to prostrate on the ground powerlessly. Even the words they spoke were forcefully suppressed in their throats, unable to be uttered. How terrifying! At that instant, the three of them only had this thought in their hearts. It was just that Ryoryoku had caused the three of them to be like this. Not only did they not have the strength to counterattack, but even they did not have the slightest will to resist. The difference in strength had actually reached such a degree that they were unable to even think of resisting. Moreover, the most terrifying thing was that this Ryoryoku was not targeted at the three of them, but this casual Ryoryoku actually made them like this. If it was deliberately targeted, what kind of power would it have? The three of them looked at each other and saw a touch of horror in each other's eyes. Kimura-sama. Just as that Ryoryoku suddenly exploded, and the three of them lay on the ground, Haribel, who was originally leaning against a stone at the side of the mountain with her eyes closed, suddenly opened her eyes. She looked at Muyang, who was sitting on the mountain peak with some joy in his eyes. Muyang, who was originally sitting on the mountain peak with his eyes closed, was now opening his eyes. After a few days of meditating, Muyang's eyes showed a hint of tiredness, but even though he looked tired, it could not hide the joy in the depths of Muyang's eyes. Hearing Haribel's cry, Muyang came back from his memories and looked at Haribel in front of him. The corners of his mouth could not help but reveal a smile. It had to be said that Haribel was really a loyal subordinate, even though he had no intention of letting her be his subordinate. Just like at this time, the respect and joy on Haribel's face and eyes were definitely not acting, but really respectful to him, and also sincerely happy that he had woken up from his meditation. Thinking back, Muyang restrained Ryoryoku, who had exploded because he hadn't been paying attention. He had gained a lot in the past few days. In the end, he didn't restrain himself and caused some trouble for Haribel and Apache. As Muyang retracted his Ryoryoku, Haribel felt that the heavy feeling that had been pressing down on him suddenly disappeared. He looked at Muyang again. Haribel only felt that a few days had passed, and Muyang seemed to have undergone a great change. However, when she carefully felt it, she couldn't tell where it had changed. Although Harabel couldn't sense what exactly had happened to Muyang, she had a faint feeling that the Kimura-sama in front of her was even more terrifying than when she had just met him a few days ago. Although Harabel didn't say anything, Muyang could roughly tell what she was thinking from her eyes. He had indeed gained a lot in the past few days. From the inner world, he truly understood what kind of terrifying Zanpakuto Kaze no Sora was. He had a clear understanding of the direction in which he would become stronger in the future. To surpass the limits of space with absolute power, to surpass time with absolute speed. This was the direction he would continue to strive for in the future. And Muyang recalled the battle with Kaze no Sora in his inner world. Although Kaze no Sora had said that he wouldn't give Muyang any specific guidance and would only give him some hints, as Zanpakuto himself, Kaze no Sora's application of Zanpakuto's abilities was clearly not something that Muyang could compare to. Just by fighting with Kaze no Sora, Muyang already had a lot of inspiration in his heart. He felt as if there were thousands of thoughts in his heart, waiting for him to slowly test them out and see if he could improve further. Kimura-sama, Harabel-sama. Just as Muyang recalled his gains from the past few days, the three people who were originally below had already recovered from their previous shock. They ran to the mountain peak and came in front of Muyang and Harabel, respectfully calling out. Muyang nodded slightly at the three people. There was still a smile on the corners of his mouth. Although he did not have many feelings for these three people, when it came to good feelings, they were far from being comparable to Harabel. After all, although Harabel was also hollow, she did not look much different from humans. However, these three people all had the appearance of wild beasts. There was always a strange feeling when they talked normally. Seeing the smile on the corner of Muyang's mouth, the three of them were secretly surprised. After all, they had not seen Muyang act so kindly to the three of them before. He had always been indifferent to them. It seemed that he was in a very good mood now. Indifference to what the three of them were thinking, Muyang only swept his eyes over them. Among these people, the only one he was really interested in was Harabel. The image of a decadent uncle and a proud loli suddenly flashed through his mind. Muyang raised his eyes and asked Harabel, "Have you seen a group of decadent uncles and an ignorant loli in Hueco Mundo for so long?" Decadent uncle? Ignorant loli? Hearing Muyang's question, Harabel was slightly stunned. "Oh, right, they are very strong. There is no mask on their faces. One of them is called Stark, and the other is called Lilinet. No mask. They are not hollow." Hearing Muyang's words, Harabel asked. "No, they are hollow. They just took off the mask on their faces. Just like you, the mask on your face has a little bit of damage. Isn't there no fake mask around your eyes? However, the level of their masks is much higher than yours. They basically don't have many masks on their faces. At least we can see their faces clearly." Harabel was shocked. There was actually a hollow that could completely take off the mask on their faces. Then such an idea suddenly emerged in his mind. Harabel thought for a moment. Since there were other hollows that could completely remove the mask on his face, then could she also do it? Seeing Harabel's shocked expression, Muyang already knew in his heart. It seemed that Harabel had never seen the two of them. Not only that, but he was afraid that he had never heard of them. Although he was slightly disappointed in his heart, Muyang then felt relieved. After all, when he watched anime in his previous life, he did not see that they had a friendship before. Harabel had not heard of Stark, but it was not beyond his expectations. "Are you looking for them for something? Do you want me to find information about these two people for you?" Harabel keenly saw a flash of disappointment on Muyang's face. She suppressed the various thoughts in his heart and said to Muyang, "No need. I will look for them myself after a while." Muyang shook his head and refused Harabel's suggestion. He should wait until he had time to look for them. Thinking of what happened to him during this period of time, Muyang himself felt a little funny. Originally, he planned to go to the modern world, but he did not expect to come to Hueco Mundo by accident. Originally, he planned to follow the clues he found to find Stark, but in the end, he met Harabel. And now he has to stay with Harabel for a longer time. After all, he has found a way to continue to become stronger. For a while, he does not want to move again. He has to cultivate for a period of time. Although Muyang refused Harabel's suggestion, the three people listening on the side firmly remembered the image of the two people that Muyang depicted. As hollow, he could take off the mask on his face. This made them very curious. The three people quietly exchanged glances. In their hearts, they secretly decided to inquire about the two people that Muyang said when they had time. They were very interested in taking off their own mask. In Hueco Mundo, monotonous and dead silence was always the main theme of this place. The moon that had existed for an unknown number of years was hanging in the air, and the faint moonlight carried a bit of sadness. In an unknown place, the ground was littered with empty corpses. There were no scars on the surface of these corpses, but strangely, they were all dead. Ah! A strangely shaped hollow stood between these corpses. It looked up at the sky and roared. Its voice was full of pain. This hollow pair of hands unconsciously grasped on its body as if it wanted to expel something from its body. Ah! Suddenly, these hollow hands clutched its neck tightly. Its voice seemed to leak out. Then, its whole body suddenly turned into spirit particles in the air and dissipated. Under the bleak moonlight of the hollow circle, the whole scene looked strange and speechless. Not far from the place where the hollow died, there were two hills made of dead bodies. After the death of the hollow, not even a corpse was preserved. The whole body turned into rasher and dissipated in the air. On the other side, there were two small mountains that were completely piled up by the dead hollows. Under the moonlight, the two hills of corpses dragged out a long shadow, and in the middle of the two shadows, two lonely figures leaned against each other and sat on the ground. The moonlight elongated the backs of the two people, and the two figures in the mountain of corpses revealed a kind of oppressive loneliness. Is he dead again? The slightly petite figure among the two figures whispered. Although it was a questioning sentence, her tone was certain. The hollow who came here met the same end. They did not remember how many times this was. They saw other hollow dies in front of them without resistance. Ah, dead. A slightly low voice came from the mouth of another person. There was not much surprise in the tone. Obviously, he was already used to it, but his tone still carried a touch of lingering melancholy. Stark. The voice from before spoke again. It was an obviously tender voice. From the voice alone, one could tell that the owner of the voice should be a little girl. Can we find companions? I don't know. The deep voice said. After a pause, it continued. It should be possible. There was a bit of hesitation in the voice, and it was obvious that even he did not believe what she said. The moonlight shone on the faces of the two people, revealing their faces. A dark brown, slightly curly short hair, grayish-blue eyes, and a short beard. There was a bit of sadness between the eyebrows. It was the image of a depressed, decadent uncle. The most surprising thing was that this person did not have a mask on his face. It was just that there was a jawbone more like an ornament on his lower jaw. However, there was a symbolic hollow hole in his chest. And next to this decadent uncle, there was a lovely girl with a one-horned helmet on her head. She had short grass-yellow hair and watery red pupils. Her petite figure was the same as the decadent uncle on the side. This girl also had no mask on her face, but a one-horned helmet covered her head. One of her eyes was replaced by a black hole. However, this little girl who should be lively and cute now had a bit of undisguised sadness and melancholy on her face. Obviously, she had a very heavy mind. Hey, Stark. What's wrong, Lillinette? How long have we been looking? I don't remember. We still have to continue searching. Of course. Although he still spoke indifferently, his tone at this time was a bit unquestionable. Then let's go. Got it. The two people who were originally leaning against each other and sitting on the ground stood up, wearing simple and crude clothes. Huh. The moment they stood up, the middle-aged decadent-looking man among the two suddenly turned his head to look behind him, his face somewhat moved, as if he had seen something extraordinary. What's wrong, Stark? Seeing the person next to him suddenly stop and turn to look behind him, the cute little loli looked up at the uncle on the side, with some doubts in her tone. Lillinette, we may not wander around looking for companions anymore. Stark said. Although it was still the indifferent tone, Lillinette, who lived with him day and night, still heard a little excitement in his tone. Could it be? A thought flashed through Lillinette's mind, and a look of surprise appeared on her face. She immediately turned around and looked behind her. Looking back, it was still the same desert, except for some corpses scattered on the ground. There was a hint of disappointment on her face. There was nothing. Looking at Stark on the side with dissatisfaction, Lillinette just opened his mouth to complain. Coming. Just as Lillinette was about to open her mouth, Stark on the side suddenly opened his mouth and said. At this time, his body had turned around and stared at the distance with a few expectations in his eyes. Seeing Stark's solemn expression, Lillinette immediately swallowed the words that had already reached her mouth. Suddenly hearing Stark's words, Lillinette immediately turned to look into the distance, but even if she jumped up, she still couldn't see anything. There was only the void and unchanging sand in sight. Just as Lillinette was feeling impatient, 3 small black dots appeared in her eyes, and the 3 black dots were rushing towards them at an extremely fast speed. This is seeing the 3 small black dots in the distance, Lillinette suddenly felt a burst of joy in his heart. Someone really came. However, just as a burst of excitement rose in his heart, Lillinette's heart was immediately filled with worry. Even if the 3 people came, could they really get along with the 2 of them? It seemed that he saw the worry of Lillinette, and Stark's mouth showed a gentle smile. Don't worry, I can feel that these 3 people are very strong, completely different from those who died before. Hearing Stark's words, there was an unspeakable excitement in the heart of Lillinette. Even his eyes seemed to have a few glittering tears. Finally, he could say goodbye to loneliness and finally no longer need to be alone with 2 people. As the 3 black spots were getting closer and closer, there were noises coming from far away. Hearing the noise coming from the ear, Stark and Lillinette brace for the upcoming impact. Apache, what did you say? Be careful, or I'll kill you. Humph, a stupid lion like you wants to kill me. I don't even know who will kill who. What, you stinky deer, don't forget, you are just a newcomer, don't get too carried away. Aya, don't quarrel any more. This time, we came with the order of Kimura-sama. Although I know that you two have a good relationship, don't quarrel like this anymore. Sung-san, you bastard. Who has a good relationship with her? Humph. As the voice became clearer and clearer, 3 black spots had already arrived in front of Stark and Lillinette. A lion, a deer, and a snake. Stark. Lillinette stood and looked at Stark. There was obviously some inquiry in his eyes. The 3 girls in front of him could really become their companions. Although these 3 people did not die immediately like the other hollow. After looking at Lillinette, Stark immediately understood the meaning in the eyes of Lily. At this time, he also had some hesitation in his heart. The 3 hollow in front of him made people feel that they were not very reliable. Unlike Stark and Lillinette's calmness, the hearts of the 3 people in front of them were filled with so many complex emotions upon arriving. Although they had already felt this Ryuryoku when they were still far away from the 2 people, when they came close, they could not help but be shocked. What a terrible Ryuryoku! Their Ryuryoku was many times stronger than Harabel and Barragan. Just by approaching the hollow, who looked like a decadent uncle, the 3 of them already felt frightened. What kind of monster was this? The three of them looked at each other and saw fear in each other's eyes. They had only felt this level of Ryuryoku from Muyang. Sensing that the three hollows in front of him were trying their best to resist him, Stark tried his best to control his Ryuryoku and was restraining himself. No matter what, these three people were the only hollow that they had encountered in so many years that they could get close to the two of them and not die. Feeling that the surrounding Ryuryoku seemed to have restrained itself a little, the three of them felt a little more comfortable. Under the suppression of Ryuryoku just now, they could not even do anything. After moving their bodies a little, the three of them had time to carefully look at the two people in front of them. This strange combination was the uncle and lowly combination that Muyang spoke of. Although they had already heard from Muyang before and knew what they were going to face, the three of them had already been prepared in their hearts, but now that they saw these two people, the three of them were still surprised. That decadent uncle actually did not have a mask on his face, but there was a bit of bone decoration on his lower jaw. Yes, in the eyes of the three of them, Stark's jaw bone can only be considered an ornament. Moreover, on the waist of that decadent uncle, there was actually a handful of zanpakuto. There was no trace of weakness at all. If there wasn't a dark hole in his chest, and there was a bit of weakness in his Ryuryoku, the two of them would have regarded him as Shinigami. As for the little girl on the side, although she wore a one-horned mask helmet, there was no mask on her face either. It was obvious that she was also in existence like that decadent uncle. You are. Looking at the three hollows in front of him, Stark hesitated for a moment, but he still opened his mouth and asked, but before he finished speaking, he was interrupted by the lion-shaped hollow opposite him. I am Mila Rose. The golden lion interrupted Stark's words and then turned his head to the snake-shaped hollow on the side. She's Sung-sun. As for that one, her name is Apache. Mila Rose, what do you mean that one? Feeling the contempt that Mila Rose had for her, a ball of anger burned in Apache's eyes as she turned around and shouted at her indignantly. You are very strong. Looking at the three noisy people in front of him, Stark did not feel the slightest anger, but his eyes showed a trace of envy. Having companions like this can be noisy with companions, get along with them, it is really a happy thing. Well. Hearing Stark's words, the noisy Mila Rose and Apache suddenly stopped. The three turned to look at Stark and Lillinette standing opposite them. Seeing the trace of envy in the eyes of these two people, the three people were puzzled as to why they felt the feeling of envy in their eyes. Although he was puzzled by the envy shown by Stark and Lillinette, what he paid more attention to was what Stark said before. Pretty strong. Mila Rose looked at Stark and did not know what the other person meant by strong. At least you are not like other hollow, just being close to us kills them. If it is you, even if you live with us, you will not die easily. You. Hearing Stark's words, Mila Rose only felt the corner of her eyes jump. Everyone who was familiar with her knew that this was a reaction she would only have when she was very angry. What do you mean won't die just because you are close to you? You really dare to say it? Mila Rose had never suffered such contempt. Although this hollow without a mask in front of him is really strong, he actually dared to say herself and others did not die because they just got close to him, so the three of them are still quite strong. These kind of arrogant words made her furious. What happened? Stark looked puzzled. What he said is indeed the truth. And because he has no experience of communicating with others, Stark does not know why this hollow in front of him suddenly became so angry. He is just telling the truth. Are you serious? Seeing Stark's blank look, the anger in the heart of Mila Rose almost could not be suppressed. This guy dared to look down on the three of them. Wait, Mila Rose. Just as Mila Rose was about to go berserk, Sun suddenly opened his mouth and called her and then motioned to the large pile of empty corpses not far away in her angry eyes. Seeing Sun's eyes signal, Mila Rose looked into the distance, and then there was a touch of horror in her eyes. Her eyes withdrew from the pile of hollow bodies in the distance. The horror in the heart of Mila Rose could not calm down. In the beginning, her attention was occupied by Stark and Lilinet in front of her. She did not care about the hill behind them, which was consist of piled up countless hollow bodies. In her heart, she suddenly recalled the horror of Stark that she felt at the beginning. There was a sudden thought in her heart. Perhaps this hollow did not lie, nor did it mean to look down on herself and others. It was just that the truth was true, as he said. The other hollow just approached them and died because they could not bear it. The thought flashed through her mind. The eyes of Mila Rose that looked at Stark immediately changed. Hueco Mundo was, after all, a place where the strong prey on the weak. It was hollow nature to respect the strong, and this hollow in front of her was obviously strong among the strong. Stark was keenly aware of the three hollows in front of him. Although he did not know what they represented, Stark still felt a kind of respect from them. You. Stark's lips moved slightly. Just as he was about to speak, his expression suddenly changed. His eyes revealed a hint of caution. His line of sight turned to the right. He felt a great sense of threat from there. It was a sense of threat that he had never felt before. Seeing Stark's demeanor, the three people were slightly stunned and then looked along onto Stark's line of sight. Harabel-sama. Kimura-sama. Seeing the two figures that appeared from a distance, the three people called out. Ha! Hearing the shout of the three people, Stark suddenly realized. The three hollows here are the subordinates of those two. Phew! A gust of wind blew, raising the sand on the ground. The two figures in the distance gradually became blurred, but only for a moment. The two figures seemed to have passed through space and instantly appeared beside them. So fast. Seeing the two figures appear in front of him in an instant, Stark's eyes shrank, and his eyes fell on the man in front of him. Feeling the aura emitted from him, Stark's pupils shrank again. So strong. You are also very strong. Feeling the strong Ryoryoku on Stark, Muyang's eyes slightly turned up. Sure enough, it is worthy of the title of Primera, the number one Espada, Stark. The only independent Arrancar existence in Espada. Kimura-sama, Harabel-sama. Seeing Muyang in front of him and Harabel standing behind Muyang, the three of them called out again. Muyang casually glanced at the three people standing at the side. You guys did well this time. Originally, I didn't have much hope, but you actually managed to find out. You flatter me. Seeing the performance of these three people, Muyang smiled slightly and no longer said anything. Turning to look at Stark standing in front of him, Muyang once again showed a smile on the corner of his mouth, and he's glad that he really found Stark. Muyang looked at Stark with a little sincerity in his eyes. I am looking for companions. Are you interested in joining? Hearing Muyang's words, Stark and Lilinette's eyes showed a trace of excitement at the same time. As two people who have been alone for a long time, the word companions is a luxury for them. And after all this time, suddenly hearing Muyang's invitation was like throwing a stone on the calm lake, and the heart of the two people who have been silent for a long time suddenly has a ripple. Looking up at Stark, Lilinette's eyes showed a trace of longing. The days of two people alone, she did not want to live anymore. How much she wanted to have a group of companions. You are very strong. Stark glanced at Lilinette's expectant eyes and then looked at Muyang. In this way, even if you are with us, you won't die easily. As you can see. Is your companion also very strong? Of course. Hearing Stark's question, Muyang answered without hesitation. There were really few weak people among his companions. This is also one of my companions. Muyang moved away, revealing Harabel, who had been hiding half of his body behind him. Seeing Harabel behind Muyang, Stark showed a strange look in his eyes, and even the eyes of Lilinette on the side showed a trace of curiosity. At this time, Harabel's image has changed a little. Although he still has a coat of blue and white like armor, the mask on his face is much less than before. The strip of a mask on his forehead had disappeared, and the thing that was connected to the mask and dragged behind his head like a fishtail had disappeared. Now Harabel only had a large mask from the lower part of the nose, and the shape of the mask was very different from the original. The interlaced teeth made the mask look a little ferocious. Although there was some difference between the appearance of the two of them, Harabel was obviously very similar to the appearance of the two of them. They were the same species, the Hollow, without their mask. Although Harabel was still far from the level of the two of them. Staring at Harabel for a while and then turned his eyes to Muyang. Stark's eyes were slightly gentle, and there was a strange emotion in his heart suddenly flowing as if he suddenly found something very important to himself. I know. A smile suddenly bloomed on Stark's face, and then the whole person seemed to suddenly come to life. The sense of loneliness that was suppressed in his heart suddenly dissipated. He only felt that his life seemed to suddenly give out a vigorous life, and everything became different. Stark, Coyote Stark. Looking at Stark reached out and put his hand in front of himself. The smile of Muyang's mouth gradually spread, and his face rippled with a smile, reaching out to hold the hand that Stark stretched out. Muyang. The two looked at each other, and there seemed to be an unusual emotion brewing between the two. Since seeing Stark for the first time and feeling the loneliness emitted by Stark, Muyang was touched in his heart. It was not the touch of emotions between men and women, nor was it the touch of emotions between gay friends. It was more like the resonance between two lonely hearts. Stark has always been lonely. Only Lily is with him, but even the two people cannot eliminate that loneliness. Stark is lonely, and Muyang too. Although he has a group of good friends, in essence, he is still not a person of this world. His loneliness is even deeper than Stark's. The two clasped hands, the two hearts that resonate with each other, thus the two lonely people finally met. Poof poof. On a large white bed, there were some pillows casually thrown around. A middle-aged man was lying on the bed. The man had a small mustache on his chin, and he looked a little handsome. However, he was only wearing simple pajamas at this time. His mouth was wide open, and there was a trace of saliva dripping from the corner of his mouth, making him look a little unreliable. Squeak! The door was opened with a creak. Although the person did not hide his intention and the sound of the door opening was very loud, the person on the bed did not notice it at all. He was still lying on the bed, sleeping soundly. Humph. A cute little loli walked into the room. She had yellow hair and watery red eyes. She looked extremely cute. However, her clothes did not make people feel that she was cute. She wore a pair of black leather shoes, hot pants, and black stockings. Her upper body was wearing a black vest with an exposed belly button. She also wore a tight black sleeve on her arm. In addition, she wore a helmet with a single horn on her head, making her look like a little demon. Looking at the middle-aged uncle who was still sleeping soundly on the bed, the little loli revealed a strong dissatisfaction in her eyes and snorted heavily. She walked to the window and pulled the curtains open. The strong sunlight shone in from outside the room and hit the person on the bed. It turned out that the sun was already in the sky outside. Ugh! As if he felt the sunlight shining on his face, the person on the bed clearly felt a bit uncomfortable, but he still had no intention of getting up. He just reached out to cover his eyes and muttered a few times in dissatisfaction. As if he still felt uncomfortable, the uncle on the bed reached out to take a pillow from the side and covered his eyes. He seemed to finally feel comfortable. The person on the bed once again made a snoring sound and actually fell asleep again. This guy. Seeing that the guy on the bed had actually fallen asleep again, a trace of anger flashed through the eyes of the little loli standing on the side. She was about to flip out, but then it seemed as if she suddenly remembered something. Her eyes flashed with a trace of slyness, and her face revealed a trace of a narrow smile. She smiled like a little fox. Although there was no one else in the room, the little loli still looked around with a guilty conscience. After making sure that there was no one else, she had a sly smile on her face. She took out a watercolor pen from somewhere and slowly sketched it on the face of the uncle who was lying on the bed. N. He seemed to have sensed something. The uncle on the bed casually waved his hand but was cleverly avoided by the little loli. The brush in his hand was still drawn on the man's face. Hee. It's a success. After a while, the little loli took a few steps back. Looking at the funny patterns left on the uncle's face on the bed, she once again looked around like a thief. After finding that she was indeed not discovered, her face immediately revealed a brilliant smile, like a little cat that had stolen a fish. Her eyes curved into a crescent shape. Putting away the watercolor pen, the little loli tiptoed to the uncle. Looking at the uncle's wide-open mouth, there was a bit of a smirk on her face. She raised one of her little hands, then put her 3 fingers together and suddenly poked the uncle's mouth on the bed. Ah! Up! With a scream, the uncle who was originally snoring loudly suddenly sat up from the bed, the tears in his eyes uncontrollably falling, looking miserable. Cough 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 cough. He reached out and grabbed his neck. The uncle on the bed coughed desperately. It was really not a comfortable thing to be caught off guard by such a sneak attack on the throat. Yo, Stark! Standing not far from Stark, the little loli had one hand behind her back, and one hand raised. She waved to Stark and greeted him. The smile on her face was particularly bright. As long as she saw the funny patterns on Stark's face, she could not help but be in a good mood. Oh, it's Lilynette. Looking up at the person standing in front of him who was smiling exceptionally brightly, the little loli who seemed to be a little devil but was actually a big devil, Stark's face was bitter. Let me go. Hey. Lilynette smiled and squinted at Stark. Let me sleep a little longer. Stark looked at the little loli in front of him, and without saying a word, he fell back to sleep again. This guy. Seeing that Stark actually fell down again, there was a trace of annoyance in Lilynette's eyes. She had come to call him, and he actually dared to continue to sleep. Moreover, he slept in front of her after being woken up. Thinking of this, Lilynette jumped. He was in the air, her feet closed together, and after some decent acceleration, he kicked at Stark's waist. It hurts. His waist was suddenly hit hard, and Stark, who originally planned to go to sleep, could not sleep peacefully. With a scream, Stark sat up and covered his waist. Don't sleep anymore. Get up. Lilynette rode on Stark's body and stretched out her small fist to Stark. There was a mischievous smile on her face, just like a devil. I know. Being hit on the face by Lilynette one after another, Stark quickly opened his mouth and begged for mercy. He really had no way to deal with this little girl. It was impossible to beat her. He could only accept the abuse like this. Humph. Hearing Stark's begging, Lilynette put down her hand, rubbed her little nose, and showed a proud expression on her face. Frowning her little nose, Lilynette looked at the clothes on Stark and said discontentedly, Stark, you better get up and get dressed quickly. These pajamas do not look good at all. But these pajamas are very comfortable to sleep in. When he heard the words of Lilynette, Stark subconsciously whispered. What, you still want to sleep? Seeing the little face of Lilynette twisted again, Stark waved his hand again and again. I am joking. That's more like it. Seeing Stark's reaction, Lilynette was satisfied. She jumped down from Stark's body and looked at the clothes on Stark with contempt. Stark, you better change your clothes quickly and go down. And you have slept for several days. Hurry up, don't make me call you again. Lilynette turned around and kicked open the door of the room. What a handful. Stark shook his head in distress, his face full of unwillingness. He reached out and scratched the hair on his head, scratching his hair in a mess. Stark finally got up from the bed helplessly. He opened the wardrobe on one side and took out the clothes that Lilynette had chosen for himself to change into. Unbelievable. Walking out of Stark's room, Lilynette still had some resentment in his heart. As she walked, she muttered with dissatisfaction. "Oh, Lillinette, what's wrong? Why do you look irate?" Just as Lillinette was muttering in a low voice, a soft voice came from the side, sounding very gentle. "Sister Kusu." Hearing the gentle voice, Lillinette's eyes lit up. He turned to look at a woman standing next to the aisle. It was a very beautiful woman. Her long black hair made her look gentle and soft. Her delicate features made everyone feel a sense of closeness the first time they saw her. The most eye-catching thing was her pair of animated eyes, as if she could see through all the thoughts in others' hearts. "What's wrong? You look unhappy." Walking to the front of Lillinette, Kusu touched her head like a sister who loved her little sister and then asked softly. "It's nothing." There was a rare trace of embarrassment on Lillinette's face. In front of Kusu, she always showed the expression of a child carelessly. "It's just Stark, that big lazy old man. He slept for several days. I went to call him, and he is still asleep and doesn't want to get up at all." Stark. Hearing the words of Lillinette, Kusu's mouth showed a gentle smile. He had known it would be like this, the two of them. "Isn't he just like this? I believe he will soon clean up and come out. I also know, but I always feel uncomfortable. We are all busy outside, and that guy is hiding in the house all day long to sleep. I feel bad thinking about it. What are you busy with?" A lazy voice came from behind Lillinette. It was Stark, who had already dressed and come out. Hearing the sudden voice, the two people who were talking turned their heads and looked at the clothes that Lillinette told him to change to. Both of them were bright in front of their eyes. Stark was dressed like a standard Western cowboy. He was wearing high boots and a wide flat-top denim hat. There was also a square towel around his neck, blocking his white bone mask. "It looks very cool. Kusu." He nodded and greeted Suzuki Kusu. Stark turned his line of sight to Lillinette. "Speaking of which, you didn't do anything at all. Who told you to look like a primary school student? I remember that the modern world seems to be unable to hire minors to work. This guy, you must have done it on purpose." Hearing Stark's words, Lillinette's face changed on the spot, and her mouth shouted to rush up and beat Stark. "Lillinette, chill." She grabbed Lillinette, who wanted to rush up, and looked at Stark with her eyes and praised, "Stark, this dress is very suitable for you. It looks very good. I remember that was the clothes that Lillinette picked for you. Her taste is really good." Oh. He didn't expect that they would suddenly talk about this topic. Stark was obviously shocked for a moment. He immediately recovered and pulled the hat he wore on his head with his hand. There was also a smile on his face. "Well, this is true. I also think this dress is very good." "Of course, I was the one who chose that." Hearing the words of Stark and Kusu, Lillinette twisted her head and showed a proud look on his face. Obviously, she was very satisfied with their evaluation. You should know that the clothes on Stark were specially chosen for him. Looking at how she acted like a child, Suzuki Kusu smiled. As expected, she was still a child, no matter how long she had lived. All right. You're a good girl, right?" Suzuki Kusu patted her head and smiled happily. "Of course. Well, let's go and see below. Now they should all be down there." Well. The three people walked forward together, turned a corner, and went down the stairs to the backyard of the first floor. Oh. The lazy Stark actually got up too. Lillinette must have dragged him from the bed. Hearing the movement from the stairs, Kuna Mashiro, who was bored and glancing around, suddenly lit up and looked at the people coming down happily and shouted. Love, who was immersed in reading manga books, looked up and glanced at the brand new Stark, and his eyes lit up. "Yo, the dress of the Western cattle is very cool, Stark, your dress is much better than Kensei. What's wrong with me like this?" Hearing Love's complaints about himself, Kensei, who was working out at the side, stopped and said discontentedly. He was wearing camouflage equipment. He looked like a soldier. Not only that dress, but even the temperament he exuded was very similar to that of a soldier. Kensei is a big fool, your clothes are simply too inferior, and they are not as good as Stark's clothes. What he is wearing is chosen by Lillinet for him, so you should wear the clothes I chose for you. The clothes you chose. Kensei recalled the clothes that Kuna Mashiro had chosen for him. Those messy tight and athletic clothes, he could not help but shiver. He actually let himself wear that kind of clothes. Just thinking about it made him feel disgusted. Unless he was crazy, he would never wear that kind of clothes. In fact, the clothes that I chose for you are not bad. It can perfectly outline your figure. Lisa, who was reading a book, raised her head slightly and pushed the glasses on the bridge of her nose. There was a flash of light on the glasses. Hearing Lisa's words, Kensei's mouth twitched slightly. The book girl was just curious about the human body. Ah! Looking at the noisy crowd over there, Stark sighed helplessly. Sure enough, when everyone is together, they keep complaining. It's really noisy. Although he looked helpless and sighed every time, he heard everyone's quarrel. Seeing everyone laughing and playing, Stark will always feel a burst of warmth in his heart. He's not alone anymore. Ah! Glancing at everyone who was doing their own things over there, Lillinet glanced around and then asked doubtfully, what about Hiyori? Didn't she say that she didn't need to work today? Why isn't she here? She went out with Shinji. I don't know where she went to play. Suzuki Kusu, who was standing beside Lillinet, explained to her. So that's how it is. Lillinet nodded and turned to the small door leading to the front hall. You guys stay here. I'm going out to help. I'm not as lazy as you guys. Everyone was indifferent when they saw Lillinet's actions. They just waved their hands casually. Only this little girl was so energetic. She had to go out to help every day, even though she couldn't help at all. I'll help too. Just halfway through his words, suddenly, his stomach made a gulu-gulu sound. Forget it. I'll go out and find something to eat first. Looking at his stomach helplessly, Stark turned and walked out in the direction of Lillinet. If he stayed here, no one would prepare food for him. Seeing that Stark also followed to leave, the corner of Suzuki Kusu's mouth curved into a smile. Hey, Chizuru, it's finally the weekend, and you said that you were going to hold a party. You said that you would arrange it. Why are you bringing us here? Outside a cafe, a few high school students stood there chatting. At this time, the one who was talking was a girl with short black hair and looked valiant, and the one she was talking to was a girl with pink glasses and red hair. Ah, Tatsuki, even if it's like this, it doesn't matter. After all, this is the place that Chizuru found. A girl with soft golden hair on the side said. The most eye-catching thing about her, besides the sunny smile on her face, was the chest area on her chest. Oh! As expected of my dearest Oriheim. The red-haired girl blushed, and there was a flame burning in her eyes. As she spoke, the red-haired girl Chizuru stretched out her hands, wanting to hug the golden-haired girl in front of her. Bang! The girl named Tatsuki easily dealt with the red-haired girl with her elbow. As expected of Tatsuki. Should we go in? A boy standing at the side asked timidly. He looked at Tatsuki and Chizuru with obvious fear in his eyes. It was obvious that he had a long-standing fear for the two girls in front of him. You should have your reasons for choosing this place, right? Another boy with a head of golden hair, who looked like a delinquent, said with a bit of impatience on his face. Well, don't be so angry, Ichigo. A boy who looked a little cute waved his hand and said to the boy who had yellow hair and looked like a delinquent. Cough cough. Seeing that the surrounding students were looking at her, the girl with red hair coughed a few times before saying in the dissatisfied eyes of the students, this is not an ordinary coffee shop. What's so special about it? The boy who spoke previously glanced at the coffee shop, although the decoration inside seems good from the outside, the name of this coffee shop is too strange. There were 3 big words written at the door of the coffee shop in Ding District. Shut up, Kigo. Don't interrupt. Tatsuki glared at the man who spoke. I understand. Kigo glanced at Tatsuki and obediently shut her mouth. There are quite a few beautiful women in this shop. Even compared to Oriheim, they are not inferior, but of course, you are my favorite. Get lost, you bastard. Tatsuki raised her fist and threatened Chizuru, who had a strange light in her eyes. She was like an old hen protecting her chicks. What? There are beautiful women there. Are you sure, Chizuru-senpai? When Kigo heard that there was a beautiful woman inside, a different color suddenly burst out from his eyes. He looked at Chizuru and asked in surprise. Chizuru turned to look at Kigo and suddenly reached out to pinch his shoulder. The strength was so great that even Kigo's face was slightly distorted. Are you questioning my ability to judge? Looking at Chizuru, who was furious in an instant, a few drops of cold sweat slid down Kigo's head. I wouldn't dare. I was only joking with you, Chizuru-senpai. Hearing Kigo's apology, Chizuru let go of her hand and then looked at Tatsuki. Don't say that I didn't tell you. There are several handsome guys in this coffee shop. Although they might be a little old, they are still very handsome. Tatsuki, you gotta get one. What are you talking about? Upon hearing Chizuru's tease, Tatsuki extended her hand and clenched her fist. Stop talking nonsense. Let's hurry up and go in.